Go. Good.
Okay.
This is a regular meeting of the Princeton Planning Board for July 1st, 2021, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2021 resolution of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Planning Board of Princeton for February 2021 through January 2022. A copy was filed with the Clerk of Princeton on January 22nd, 2021. Legal notice on the adoption of said resolution was published in the January 25th, 2021 edition of the Princeton Packet. Notice of this meeting also has been posted on the municipal website, princetonnj.gov/calendar. Pursuant to Executive Order 107, due to the state of emergency in New Jersey regarding COVID-19, the coronavirus, notice that during the declared state of emergency, all regular and special meetings of the Princeton Planning Board will be held electronically via Zoom, was transmitted to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, and the Times, and was filed with the Clerk of Princeton on April 8th, 2020, and again on January 6th, 2021. Please note, as with regular in-person meetings, members of the public will have an opportunity at a specific point in the proceedings to comment and ask questions. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded. Those wishing to comment orally should virtually raise your hand using the button at the center of the bottom of the participant screen, or if participating by phone, by pressing *9. Oral comments will be taken in the order in which hands were raised. We ask with respect that members of the public please do your very best to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Inappropriate public comment containing obscenity, hate speech, or relating to matters not before the board will be muted. Carrie, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizzoli,
I'm here.
Mr. Cohen,
Here.
Mr. McGowan,
Here.
Mr. Oakman,
Jeff, you're on mute.
Right here.
Mr. Quinn,
Here.
Ms. Sachs.
I'm here and I'm not Michael Laplace.
I'll change it. Mr. Texarney,
Here.
Mr. O'Donnell,
Here.
Mr. Chow,
Here.
Mrs. Wilson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any announcements from board members or from staff? Okay, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is reorganization, and specifically the report of the nominating committee. Julie, I know you're chairing that committee. Did you say earlier that Mr. Oakman would report out? I'm not sure.
That's correct.
Um,
He graciously volunteered.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
We
Yes.
cannot hear you very well, so maybe you can
Shout.
project.
Okay.
Turn
Is
the
that
microphone
better?
volume up.
That's a little bit better.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Julie for chairing this committee. I think I just want to start by thanking Wanda Gunning for her years of service. A truly remarkable run that shaped this town that we all love and set an inspiring example of public service for all Princetonians. This report is here because filling her shoes is both impossible but also required, since the show must go on. And unfortunately, we do have a deep bench on this planning board, with many members who have already demonstrated strong leadership. So with that, I'd like to say that for the chair, we're pleased to nominate Louise Wilson. And for vice chair, we're pleased to nominate Tim Quinn. And I guess at this point, I mean, I can answer questions, or I should ask Mr. Mueller to kind of take us through the discussion and voting process.
Well, I think probably what we should do is first put a motion on the table. I would do it first for the chair. And once the motion is made and seconded, there should be a board discussion on it, to the extent board members want to have any discussion, and then a vote on the chair, and then do the same thing for the vice chair.
Great. So I will move. I'll move to elevate Louise Wilson to planning board chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
And I will also move to invite Tim Quinn to be our vice chair for planning board.
I will also second.
I guess then it falls to me to call for the vote. I didn't feel like I could do that before. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed or any
I,
abstentions?
Congratulations both, and thank you for being interested in serving. We're looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you
thank you.
so much. Thanks to the committee for your good work. And I mean, it's such an honor and a privilege, and also bittersweet. Mr. Oakman was really eloquent in talking about the leadership we're going to do without and with Wanda's absence, and I miss her. But I am also, so glad that we have such a skilled and dedicated and capable board in all of you. So thanks a whole lot for your confidence. I appreciate it, and I will do my best. So next on the agenda is minutes. The April 4th, 2019 meeting. This was a regular meeting. I submitted some very minor edits, which Carrie incorporated. There were in no way substantive. Does anybody else have any comments or suggestions vis-a-vis the April 4th, 2019 minutes? Someone want to move them?
I'll move on.
I need a second.
Second.
I will second.
I think Mr. Oakland was in right under the wire, Mr. Quinn. So, great. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed or abstaining? I guess it's a subset of us who are eligible to
Would you like me to list who is eligible?
vote on those minutes. Just make a note of it in the minutes of this meeting.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yes.
Does everybody know whether they're eligible to vote or not? If no one's quite sure, they should, and I know the minutes showed it. Carrie should go over who's eligible.
Okay, Carrie, why don't you go over that? Who's eligible to vote?
Mr. Cohen, Ms. Sachs, Mr. Oakman, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Texarney, Mr. McGowan, and yourself, Mrs. Wilson.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, on to applications. First up, we have Simplify Living. This is continued from May 6th, 2021. This is a minor site plan with variances at 23-25 Humbert Street, block 4401, lot 12. This is file number P1919-746 PM. And
Madam Chair,
yes, Mr. Cohen.
I just want to remind members of the board and the public that I need to recuse from this application due to a business relationship with one of the objectors.
Okay, thanks. So you'll be back later, or are you gone for the rest of the meeting?
I'll be back for the second application, assuming we get to it.
I hope and expect that we will.
Yikes.
So it wasn't very long ago that this was before us, but there have been some changes, additional variances were required, I believe. And so Mr. Purcell issued a memo to that effect and explained them. And Jim, if you could walk us through that right now, that'd be helpful.
Let me
Yes,
just
Madam Chair.
let me just jump in for a moment in terms of the process. As the chair indicated, we had a first hearing on it. It was actually back on April 15th. At that point, we hadn't finished. We were continuing it to May 6th. Between the April and May meetings, it was determined that more variances were necessary. And I guess it was discussion between staff and Derek, and Jim could fill in on this, and the attorney for the applicant, and maybe their professionals, that they would prepare an exhibit showing all of the variances that were necessary. And we determined at the May 6th meeting that we would limit this meeting to basically a discussion by their professionals, any opposition, and there are opponents who are represented by counsel, and the public to that exhibit and those variances. So that's where we are. So we're not kind of reopening the whole thing. We've gone through most of it. It's just on the variances. And go ahead, Jim, if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
So sworn or affirmed.
Before Jim begins, I just wanted to advise that the applicant had renoticed because of all the additional variances. Everything is in order. I checked the proof, and proof of jurisdiction is in order.
Yeah, I mean, the board had jurisdiction. The purpose of the supplemental notice was just as a courtesy to the public generally and the neighbors, that there'd be this further hearing and an explanation of what it was about, and the fact that it's just a supplement to an existing hearing and we weren't redoing everything.
Okay, that's good to understand.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I just wanted to ask everyone who isn't speaking to please mute because we're getting some background noises. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. On your screen, you're identified as Mia Sachs, just FYI.
Well, I'm just, I'm honoring our esteemed councilwoman.
You're looking good, Mia.
Michael, my long lost twin.
How did that happen? Okay, never mind. I got it.
Carrie changed me, Michael. Yeah, Carrie changed Mia to Mia, and apparently changed both Michael Laplace's to Mia.
Well, you know what? I'm proud to be Mia Sachs. So
Thank you, Michael. I'm honored.
Okay, let's get it back between the ditches.
So I did have a question. The genuine me had a question, which was at the end of the last hearing on this, the applicant had called on a planner to give some testimony about there's some zoning, some zoning, some applicable zoning laws. I'm just trying to remember, and it was somewhat confusing, and I think that it was not all possibly accurate, and I was just wondering if either maybe our planner or someone could weigh in on if it's still relevant to what we're discussing, that discussion at the end.
Actually, I think what Jim's going to talk about will sort of focus on where the discrepancy or the discrepancies.
Yeah, I was about to say that, but I wasn't sure of the specific information that.
And I'll jump in. I'll jump in if I think something needs to be.
But,
Yeah,
okay.
why don't you go ahead,
Yeah.
Jim, and if what he says doesn't address what you hoped it would, Mia, then we can explore that further, okay? All right.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you all know, the applicant has provided a new exhibit that identifies the zoning variances that they've determined in consultation with us that are required in order for this application to move forward. We analyzed that exhibit, and we also discovered a second variant, an additional minor variance that was not included in their exhibit, and we'll discuss that as we go through. What is difficult with this application is that the zoning district that it is in, the R4 zoning district, allows for attached dwellings. But the R4 zoning for attached dwellings envisioned a side-by-side arrangement of attached units that would front on a street with having conventional side and rear yards. The applicant for this, this development, 2325 Humbert Street, is proposing a development that is not fronting on the main street, but is perpendicular to the main street. And the proposal is that one unit actually does has its front door on Humbert Street. The interior unit, the middle unit, fronts on the existing driveway, and the rear unit then is turned another 90 degrees, and its front door opening is on the rear yard. Although this is the pattern of the adjacent development on the opposite side of the driveway, this layout does not provide conventional side and rear yards or provide usable open space adjacent to the units as was contemplated in the R4 zoning ordinance. So in this configuration, and this was most of our discussion, the concept of lot width is not intuitive. Neither is the concept of lot depth intuitive. So we took an approach where we looked at the bulk requirements for the overall lot itself, which is the first page of our memo, and looked at the bulk requirements of the size of the lot and what requirements would be if we were constructing a building on that lot. So I'm going to start at the bottom of my chart, which says minimum lot area total of 9,000 square feet. That would be the overall required minimum size of the lot. And they have an existing 11,008 square feet. Therefore, they actually comply. The maximum floor area ratio that's allowable in this zone is 45%. They have 44.8% proposed and therefore comply. The maximum impervious coverage, however, is a required maximum of 36%. The existing was 51.8%, and they're proposing 70.9%. Thus, a variance is required. And then, of course, the maximum height that is allowed is 40 feet. The existing is less than 40 feet, and their proposed is less than 32.3 feet. Therefore, they comply. Now, that was for the overall outbounds of this entire lot. What we then looked at in terms of zoning and land use is that the intent of the multiple dwelling ordinance is that each unit has its own distinct requirements. So I'm hoping this is helping with the explanation. So in applying the ordinance, we then consider that there are we're considering that there are two sets of bulk requirements, one set for the overall lot, which I just went through, and one set for each individual unit. In this manner, the overall lot width of 61.22 feet does exceed the required lot width of 60 feet. And the overall lot depth, which is 184.43 feet, exceeds the required lot depth. And I already went through the other bulk requirements of size of lot and height. Then we look at front, side, and rear yard setbacks for the overall lot are then 15, 35, and 20 feet. And the 20-foot side yard the 20-foot side yard setbacks are combined with 8 feet being for the smaller yard. And all of them comply in terms of the lot, if we were to put a single building on the lot. As to the individual bulk conditions, however, we'd have to consider that all of the units are actually oriented so that their front is facing the private access drive. If we don't do that, then the 2N units would have no rear yards. So think of the unit that currently faces Humbert Street. If we were to consider the Humbert Street yard as the front yard, their rear yard would be the interior unit, the second unit, the middle unit of the building. And therefore it has no rear yard. So we determined that the front yard actually faces the access driveway, and the rear yards are those yards that are between, that have the backyard, that back porch to that face the opposite and the opposite lot, the adjoining lot. So we had to do an analysis of those individual units to look at their bulk requirements. And as you can see on the chart in our report, perhaps I should be showing my screen. Would that help? Would it help if I showed the screen?
I think it definitely would.
Yes. Yes, I think it would. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I should have thought of that before. My apologies. Would have been easier for me too, because would have been looking at the right thing. Okay, so when we look at these look at each individual unit, we think of them as individual lots. And the minimum lot size of each unit that's required is 3,000 square feet. Well, breaking this up into Unit A, Unit B, and Unit C, we see that we need variances on the lot size for each of those units. Similarly, we look at the minimum usable open space, which is 600 square feet per unit. They're all non-compliant, but the applicant will testify as to why they believe that there is sufficient usable open space for these units in their presentation. The minimum lot width of 40 feet is met for the Unit A, which is the unit closest to Humbert Street. There is no minimum lot width for the interior unit, but so there is a minimum lot, the minimum lot width for the end units is 40 feet. So we have Unit A and Unit C, which are the one facing Humbert Street and the one to the rear of the lot. They both meet the lot width requirement. Similarly, for the minimum lot width for an interior unit, the requirement is 20 feet, and the Unit B is 32.6 feet wide, and therefore it meets the minimum lot width as well. Minimum lot depth, however, is 80 feet per unit. The existing lot depth of 182.6 is actually the existing depth of the overall lot, so it's a little confusing. Probably should not have been in this table. But if you think of each unit as running from side property line to the back property line, Unit A is only 60.7 feet long. Unit B's lot is only 60.4, and Unit C is only 59.4, since the overall lot actually narrows as it gets farther back. So all of those units need a variance for minimum lot depth. Minimum front yards are 15 feet. And as we consider the front yard to be toward the access drive, each one of them complies. Minimum side yards for the end units are 20 feet. The front unit, Unit A, that's closest to Humbert Street, needs a variance because they've added a porch on it so that they have a visual front of the unit, as was requested, facing Humbert Street, so it looks like a house on Humbert Street. And by adding the porch, they've reduced the front yard to 12 feet. So they'll need a variance there. Unit B does not require a side yard since it's in the middle. It's the middle unit, could not have side yards. And Unit C exceeds it because it has the common open space in the backyard and the parking lot. Then the minimum rear yards. The minimum rear yard would be that area of the property that is up against the adjoining property line opposite the access drive. The required minimum rear yard is 25 feet. The units only have 5.5 feet, 4 feet, and 5.5 feet. So I will stop there to see if you are able to visualize what we are talking about when we analyze this in terms of the individual units having individual lots that are actually parallel to Humbert Street. Does it make sense at this point?
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
I totally follow what you're doing, but at the top, if you can scroll up just for a second, the top line. No, sorry, the beginning of page 2, the top of that chart we were looking at. I'm just confused how if the minimum lot size is 3,000 feet, the first two are below that, but then unit C is like 6,000 square feet.
Oh, that should not need a variance. Or
So that one does not need that variance, right?
correct.
Okay, thanks.
Apologies on that one.
Jim, for what's now being considered the minimum rear yard, that side abutting I believe the neighbors are at 71 Humbert, is the 5.5 feet, there's a porch on each of those units, I believe, or at least on the middle one. Is that the depth to the porch or the depth to the exterior wall of the building itself?
That is the depth to the porch.
Okay.
And Derek, if you could jump in, I think we might have an error there because it may be 8 feet. Regardless, it does not meet the minimum rear yard setback.
Want to check
Eric?
something, Jim?
Derek,
Yeah.
if you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, sir.
That's sworn or affirmed.
Yeah, if the porches are encroaching, I believe we've got 9.5 feet, 8 feet, and 9.5 feet for the rear yards. Because we're allowed to have a porch that encroaches 4 feet into the rear yard.
Correct.
Either way, they need a variance.
Yes.
Mr. Chow, did you have a question?
Yeah, I didn't understand that one row there, it's called minimum lot depth. It says 80 feet. So is that?
Yes. Picture. Sorry, Mr. Chow, go ahead.
The access.
I think I interrupted him and over spoke on his voice.
Oh,
Mr.
I'm
Chow.
Could you
sorry.
repeat?
Yeah, how's that 80 feet, which direction is that 80 feet going from which
That would
border?
that would be parallel to Humbert Street. That's how we approach this, that the minimum lot depth for each unit would be parallel to Humbert Street. That 182.6 is actually perpendicular to Humbert Street, should not be in the table.
Well, that is the existing lot depth as the site is currently configured, so.
Yeah, that's the
Good.
depth from Humbert Street to the rear lot line.
Okay, so if all the doors are facing the access road, you've turned it 90 degrees to say.
Yes,
Right.
correct. Okay,
Just one more question.
Yep.
Regarding the change to what is considered the front yard now, which is basically facing Humbert Lane,
yes.
I believe you said. Are there entrances on that side? I believe the middle unit has one, but do the two ends, and does that make any difference for what is considered a front yard?
This is an odd configuration, so, I mean,
Definitely.
as Jim alluded to earlier, we had a hard time, like, if you go off the front as being Humbert, then there is no rear yard, so just for the sake of illustrating this in the really the only way we could come up with after looking at it many times is we are considering the fronts along that access drive. I mean, there's really no other way to look at it, so.
Okay, but where an entrance is positioned does not really
Right.
affect what you
No.
consider the front yard. Okay, thank you.
So I'll move on to the other variances that are required. They do require driveway side setbacks variance. The required side setback is 5 feet. The proposed is 2 feet. That's because the driveway is the access drive for the adjoining properties as well. Required parking setback in the back is 5 feet. There's a 0-foot existing, and they're going to bring it out to 5. They're leaving the existing in place, so they actually need a variance, but they also have 5 feet for the new pavement where the parking area is going to be. We also analyzed the distance between buildings. Section 17A 383 is the distance between buildings and windows and habitable rooms of adjoining buildings. They have a required distance of 14.6, and they're proposing 12.4. So they'll have to, they're requesting a variance for that as well. And that is the
And as I recall, that was, even though it requires a variance, it's still further away than the previous building was from the adjoining building.
Okay, that is the end of my explanation, Madam Chair.
Okay. Ms. Sachs, did that address what you hoped it would in terms of the planning considerations?
Well, I just want to clarify, I actually didn't mean it was the applicant's planner, it was the objector's planner, from Burgess and Associates, if I remember correctly. But I think we've gone in a variety of different directions since then, and the matter has become even more confused in certain ways and clearer in other ways, but I'm not sure that those considerations that at that point are still particularly relevant. So, but thank you, Jim.
And I think it would be helpful now if when we hear from the applicant to see some of the graphics that kind of, it'll be help a visual help. It'll be an assist to what we just heard Jim go through.
Okay, that sounds good. Who is here representing the applicant? Mr. Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Congratulations. Sorry for this being the first one that you have to handle. And thank you, Jim, and everyone from the staff for working with us. It is a little complicated. It's a different way of looking at it. Again, I'm Ryan Kennedy from Stevens and Lee, from the applicant. Remember from a couple months ago.
I know you were sworn in then. Jerry, does Mr. Kennedy need to be sworn in again, or is?
I'll do my best not to testify. I might
Right.
slip into that.
Okay.
But we do have our
Sorry.
engineer and planner, Jim
Right.
Kamalik here, who.
Right, as the attorney, we don't swear him in.
Okay, right.
But that's a good reminder, though, for me to leave my summary squarely in summary and not in testimony, which all attorneys are loath to do. We do have our planner and engineer who was here at our last meeting when we went through the variances, and we prepared a visual, and Jim and Derek did a good job of capturing, we think, everything. And by everything we mean the kitchen sink, because this was done from our perspective out of an abundance of caution. This is a way of looking at things that the code and the town hasn't really grappled with before, and some of the aspects of it just don't make a whole lot of sense. The project itself hasn't changed, with the exception you'll see is that we heard loud and clear that the importance of the actual front porch on what I'll call the actual front. You'll hear that it's a side yard setback now, but along Humbert Street itself, we've added, as the board requested, a traditional front porch. Because the former borough can only have one front yard, that porch is now in a side yard that fronts onto what we would think and what we looked at initially as the actual street. So I think Jim and Derek had everything right, with those two exceptions just of the superfluous information. We did our supplementary notice just to as a belts and suspenders, and I'm hoping that our planner and engineers exhibit. Last time we had one exhibit that was our PowerPoint slides. I guess we'll mark this as exhibit 2, if that's all right. And I'll Mr. Mueller, if we want to have our expert was previously sworn.
No, he doesn't have to be sworn again because it's still the same hearing. But let's mark that as Exhibit A2 and then have your expert describe what it is.
Thank you. Jim, welcome back. And thank you for putting this together. If you want to share your screen with Exhibit 2 that we prepared to help explain not these new variances, but a way of looking at this building to help the board see what conceptually turning the variances on them side, what that means, and where the front is now side and where the side depth is now the front to back depth. So perhaps you could zoom in a little bit, maybe just onto the colored part, and we can go through what Jim went through, but visually.
Sure. Can you see my cursor here?
Yes.
I can. Hopefully the board can.
Okay. So as we discussed, we have Humbert Street on the left-hand side of the plan, and we have the access driveway referred to as Humbert Place in this hatched area between the yellow proposed buildings and the pink existing dwellings. And as you can see here, this immediate area of the neighborhood has this arrangement about the access driveway or Humbert Place such that the existing dwelling units that are to the immediate north that I'm highlighting here, 1, 2, and 3, they also front onto Humbert Lane in that arrangement. So similarly, in this attached dwelling arrangement as delineated here, the proposed units are also oriented in a similar pattern to what's existing on the opposite side of the street for Unit A, Unit B, and Unit C, basically following that same general pattern of this immediate area of the neighborhood. Now, as we were discussing before, Jim had mentioned that we had originally, and the board professionals took a look at this lot in terms of the overall boundary relative to the bulk requirements. That was analysis 1. And then analysis 2, which we're presenting tonight, is highlighting the individual sort of sublots of the attached dwelling arrangement for Unit A here, where the front yard for Unit A from a zoning standpoint would be fronting on Humbert Place, the same for Unit B and the same for Unit C, because they're generally oriented towards this access way, which is unique for this property. In order to round out the aesthetics and the architectural features of the building and the way that it fits in with the lot, I think everybody would agree that it is appropriate to have a main access to Unit A as fronting on Humbert Street, independent of a bulk requirement analysis if we were to consider, which we are, a front yard arrangement on Humbert Place. So as you can see here, the board asked for the addition of a front porch, which was added. It's highlighted here in red, a 5-foot wide front porch, and I believe it transitions to even greater than that at the front door, and then provides access onto Humbert Street. Now, this is extremely similar to what was there in the pre-existing conditions, such that, as you can see, the proposed building is within 8 inches of the existing building, the existing dwelling that was at the site. So the front facade matches. The front facade also matches the neighboring dwelling here to the immediate south. Additionally, if you looked closely, you could see that there was a pre-existing porch on the formerly existing dwelling that has since been demolished that extends either further into towards Humbert Street. Jim and Derek did identify that since this is an end unit, side yard setback where 20 feet is required, and they are measuring that setback not to the facade, but to the edge of the porch, that which would be 12 feet. Actually 17 feet is the measurement to the front facade where 20 feet is required. But if we're considering that setback to be 12 feet with this porch to the right of way line, in the pre-existing condition, it was 9 feet. So that setback is being increased by 3 feet, or in other words, made better by 3 feet with this project, in our view, based on what was there before. It further encroached. The other thing that this does is it provides some additional area within the front yard for open space, satisfying open space requirements with the porch, which can be occupied by pedestrians, as well as the front sidewalks and lawn green space area that provides in excess of the minimum required 600 square feet of open space. So as you look at Unit B, as Jim mentioned, we have one entrance here in the central portion. They all have accesses in the rear yard, which is on the south boundary line here. And then Unit C would have an access that would basically face the parking area with these 2 parking spaces, as you recalled, located strategically here at the rear of the lot. And it would be appropriate for this entrance as well to have proximity to this parking area, as well as facing the open space at the rear. But what this parking area does in this particular location is it provides and maintains the availability of egress within this travelway, within the driveway, as well as the ability for some parking options for these neighboring small lots that are also fronting on this driveway and utilize this access easement. So if the applicant's parking stalls were put along this property line here, it would really minimize the ability of providing parking options for the neighbors. The reason I mention this is because it's important, and this is the reason why you get one lot, Unit C, of 6,800 square feet, which far exceeds the 3,000 minimum sublot area requirement. And then you're left with the remaining lot area to be divided between Units A and Unit B, while still satisfying as much of a setback from Humbert Street on Unit A, which I just discussed. So in terms of lot area, just giving you the broad brushstrokes, lot area is entirely satisfied. But when you look at how much area each lot has, it's really driven by practical on the ground site considerations relative to proximity to the street and placement of new parking at the rear for a good reason to maintain open accessibility to this access driveway. Okay, so that's the reason why Unit A and Unit B on a sublot basis has slightly less than 3,000 square feet as indicated in the table. We agreed a variance isn't required for Unit C. So overall, in terms of the context of the layout of these lots, we feel that they match this immediate neighborhood and the existing dwellings that abut Humbert Place and this access driveway. And what we've done here with this exhibit is tried to identify administratively any other administrative variance that enables this to happen based upon these unique conditions here.
Jim, a little bit just to talk more about the open space. So when we initially talked about it, we referred to it cumulatively. You know, there's 1,800 square feet required between the 3 units, at which we at the time we felt we were slightly deficient with. But now, you know, those dotted lines are not really lot lines, but those are kind of conceptual ways to look at the project and think about them as individual units. And can you take the board through how each of the 3 units has their 600 and then some square feet of open space accessible to them?
Sure. So let's start at the rear with Units B and Unit C. As I mentioned before, we have this access driveway, we have parking area that's strategically located at the rear. And then we're looking at the open space availability, and we identified this area as highlighted in this dotted green area of 1,210 square feet. And we're highlighting this as basically a shared open space area for the benefit of units B and unit C. We think this is reasonable and appropriate, given the fact that this open area as one contiguous 1,200 square feet open space is really more usable from a usability standpoint, as opposed to two slivers of a 600 foot square foot area. We think this is more usable. It fits within our site. And since it's in excess of 1,200, we're at 1,210, we feel that we meet the area. We also meet the minimum 20 foot in any direction stipulation for open space for this particular area. Now, when we were at the board last time, even though Unit B can access this open area through their front ingress and egress down the sidewalk, there was a question about, well, if they went out the back door onto the back porch and they wanted to get to the open space, how would they do that? Well, what we did is we identified this hatched area with the diagonal lines as approximately 5.5 foot wide passageway where Unit B can effectively access from the rear the open space. So not only will it have access from the front egress, but also from the rear. And that's how we address that from the board.
And Jim, that extra space that B has, that's not included in the 1,200 though. That's kind of on top of that. That passageway is.
Yeah, this is additional
area.
above and beyond the 1,200. This is really just providing ingress and egress to the 1,200 square feet. Unit A, we are proposing to satisfy the open space with providing 850 square feet, which exceeds the 600 square foot minimum within the front yard area to include the porch. And in this particular case, since technically we do exceed the gross square footage of 600 foot minimum, however, we're limited on the meeting the 20 foot minimum distance in any direction. In actuality, it's 17 feet that we're providing. It doesn't quite meet that stipulation. And therefore, we're asking for a variance for relief for not meeting that 20 foot in any direction requirement. But still at 850, including the porch, which we see as an asset and an amenity, we feel that that area could support open space for Unit A.
Thanks, Jim. And then on top of all of that, one of the other, the only other minor change to this plan, I think, is the board suggested we tighten up the parking in the back, and there is a part that is not shaded green all the way in the back by the parking. That is, I guess, additional, we'll say usable space. It does not meet that 20 foot in any direction requirement for the calculation of the 600 feet, but actually is that additional space that would be available to the tenants, the renters here as well, Jim?
Yeah, it's additional landscaped area in front of these parking stalls that we didn't necessarily include, but it is still there. And it is less than the 20 square feet. So there is some additional area that would have some trees and plantings and things like that. The board did also ask us if we could reduce this radius here in the parking area in order to maximize a planted area in this location. And so we did do that and shifted this a few feet further to the north, but still maintaining a 24-foot egress from these parking stalls.
Now, Jim, I'm just going to ask you now, just to clarify, since the pavement areas were tweaked a little bit, there was extensive testimony at the first hearing from you about stormwater and coverage. Did the coverage increase at all as part of this? Did we kept it exactly the same as your testimony?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So there is no change to the plan relative to the requested impervious coverage.
Thank you. Thank you. So perhaps before Jim gives a little bit of just a wrap up, maybe, there was extensive testimony about the need for the variances and planning testimony at the first hearing. The basis for those variances certainly doesn't change by the technical reconfiguration of what these variances are. But perhaps before we get to that, Madam Chairwoman, I don't know if it would benefit the board to have an opportunity to just make sure we're all on the same page about Jim Township's or Princeton's Jim, list of variances as we've explained visually here, and maybe just make sure if anyone has any questions from a technical perspective. I'll be honest, if I were following along, I think I get it, but I'd be lying if I said I definitely would. Which way is up at this point is a little difficult. So perhaps before we get back to that, it would be a good opportunity to make sure that everyone understands which way we're oriented now with some of these variances.
Sure, thanks. Do any board members have questions? I think is this the right time, Mr. Mueller, to invite members of the public who have questions specific to the additional variances to pose those? Or I know we had public comment last time. I just don't want to forget about folks who might want to weigh in on new information tonight.
Yeah, if the applicant is finished with its presentation, it would be, although I would suggest that Mr. Pigeon be given an opportunity to proceed first. He's representing, as you know, two objectors, and he's the attorney for them.
Okay.
But both Mr. Pigeon and the other members of the public, yes.
And I certainly agree with Mr. Pigeon being given that opportunity and first as well. The only I'll just reserve for any perhaps cleanup testimony from our engineer. And again, he had extensive testimony on the variances needed. They have changed from a technical perspective a little bit, and I don't want to prejudice the rest of your evening with recapping all of it. But just perhaps after Mr. Pigeon's questions or and the public testimony, that we just reserve a few minutes for that if it's needed.
Madam
Okay,
Chair, I have a request. I'm just wondering, do you have, I think we saw a rendering in the first presentation of what the finished product would approximately look like. And I'm wondering if it would be possible as a refresher to see that again, and has that changed, how, and see how that has changed, or if it has changed.
I'll be honest and see. I'll stall a bit while Jim perhaps looks for it if he has a copy. I don't believe we've updated the rendering. The building itself is located in the same spot. Now I'll let Jim talk about it a little bit, but this is what we had shown at the last hearing, and I do not believe Jim, I'll let you speak.
Yeah, I can just highlight here the architectural plan of the front of the building with the porch added. That's illustrated here in side elevation B.
Front meaning fronting on
Humbert Street.
So, Mr. Mueller, since this was a revised submission that we sent, I believe, or has not been previously presented as an exhibit, let me ask that we mark the slightly revised architecturals that show the new porch as Exhibit 3.
And that's dated 5/17/2021.
Can I have the sheet number, please? I can't see it.
Sure. A4.
Thank you.
So Jim, I know you were provided all of the architectural plans for you to do the updated site plan, but aside from the addition of the porch, there's no other changes architecturally that you provided. So, thank you.
And Ms. Sachs, we do have the rendering from the presentation last time, which does not necessarily reflect that front porch, but if you wanted to see that, we could pull it up for you.
I think that would be helpful. If it's not too much trouble, if it's easily accessible.
Can you see that there?
It's still the architectural plans, Jim.
Oh, okay. All right, just bear with me. Let me try to.
Fortunately, this application between Jim now and my office has been plagued by computer issues. Here it is there. So this is the, well, when I had the right sheet to it, this is the A1 exhibits from the prior presentation.
And basically, as I'm highlighting here along the right side of the building, this will face Humbert Street, which is our side yard, but really acting as a front yard. The porch is extended now across the front facade, providing front porch on this building. But this is pretty much the applicant's rendering of what the site would be going to from a early 19th century, rather rundown two-family dwelling to a 3-unit building such as you see here.
Thank you. Yes, I remember the dog in front. I wasn't sure if that was a pug or I thought at first it was a sheep.
Do you have handy a landscape plan? I'm particularly interested in whether you envision screening. Okay, that's
Yes.
yeah. So those plantings that I see sort of along the bottom or southern property line, what are those specified?
They're specified as arborvitae, green giant arborvitae, and the intent here is to start from near the building corner of the adjacent dwelling and provide them with screening along their backyard, the common property line, to basically the end of the new building, to provide that privacy for them.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing to try for. I'm just wondering whether that leaves room for people to get from the back of Unit B to, their portion of the open space in the side yard to the right next to the parking. But that is what I wanted to see, sort of how you envision the plantings and how, whether they leave room for foot traffic.
Right, and we feel that there will leave room for foot traffic here to access the rear. We did extend planting some trees that'll be sort of overstory in the backyard, screening the rear part of the site. And also too, just to highlight, you can see here this hatched area that I'm highlighting. That's the location of the existing building here. This gray hatch within the green limit, and you can see that we're increasing the setback beyond that which is existing to the main facade, far beyond what it was previously. I think previously it was approximately 5.5 feet of a setback from the pre-existing dwelling to the property line, and that's being increased to 9.5 feet to the new facade of the dwelling within the rear yard. So
it looks as if you're, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but it looks as if your arborvitae are estimated to be about 2 feet in diameter, which, it just isn't what they become. And I'm just questioning whether the scale of that is accurate. If it was 5 feet, then the distance from the new rear wall of Unit B is not much more than 5 feet. Anyway,
One, maybe Jim can clarify a little bit. I think those were measured from the, you want to clarify whether those are building measurements or from the porch? There's I believe a longer distance from the building to the sideline rather than
they are porch measurements. But I mean, we can certainly look at if there's a need to modify the plantings or look at a more columnar evergreen screen here. We feel that it does work, but if there's a way to increase some space, we can always do that too.
I thought, Jerry Muller speaking, that the the measurements of 4 feet and the 5.5 feet were from the building itself and not from the porch. And I thought there was another plan that we saw a few minutes ago that showed that. On the assumption that that is true, and it's really 4 feet from Unit C to the south property line, I don't see how this conceivably works with the arborvitae, particularly the passageway that you showed on one of your first plans is exactly in the location of the arborvitae. I just don't understand this.
Jim, do you want to zoom into the, into those numbers? I think what happens is that when you go from what initially was discussed as a side yard, the distance between the looking from Humbert Street, the right side of the building to the house next door, versus the rear yard with the porch, the numbers are to the building.
Okay. Yeah, I see on this sheet, it does show the 4 feet and the 5.5 feet to the porches. Yeah. Just still seems very tight to me, but I don't know if our professionals want to comment on that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that perhaps a solid fence or some kind of stockade fence would make more sense than the arborvitae, just to give more passageway, more room there.
Well,
Yeah.
I believe we have a fence there as well.
Yeah,
Is that
we're still proposing a solid fence there.
Yeah, so then we might need to field test whether that, or really just consider whether the arborvitae at full maturity, will fit there.
we'd certainly be happy to work with the town's professionals on that. Our goal is just to make sure that we do whatever we can to, screen appropriately. And if there's a different solution, we'll certainly do that.
So any other questions from board members before we hear from Mr. Pigeon? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board professionals and staff. My name is John Pigeon. I represent the objectors who own the properties across Humbert Place. And I just have several questions of the applicant's witness. You say the impervious coverage has not changed as a result of these changes to the plans?
That's correct.
So there's still going to be 70.9% impervious coverage when 35% is required?
Yes, sir.
Now, with respect to, especially Unit B, so that's a 9-foot yard, not counting the porch, is that correct? Backyard?
That's an 8-foot.
8 foot. And then the porch takes up 4 feet of that?
Correct.
So they essentially have no backyard for Unit B, is that correct?
They have backyard, they have open area to the side of their porch.
Of 8 feet wide?
That's correct. And then they have the open space at the rear.
And the rear, so their open space, their proposed open space is essentially in the front yard of Unit C.
That's correct.
So
It's
isn't
not
that
in the
impractical?
front yard, but it is near their access.
Well, it's near their front porch. And I know the definitions here have gotten all jumbled up because of the strange configuration of this project. But in actuality, it's the front of Unit C.
It's near the main access of Unit C and adjacent to the parking.
Right, and it's Unit C's front door.
Correct.
So they're supposed to walk down this 5 foot wide easement to the front yard of Unit C, and that counts as Unit B's open space?
Yes, or they can walk down the sidewalk.
Now, how deep is the backyard proposed Unit C?
$38 feet.
No, I mean, from the back, using the new definition of back, of rear yard, how far is it from the back of that structure to the property line behind the building?
9.5 feet.
And 5.5 feet of that is going to be taken up by the access easement for unit B.
Correct.
And they're going to be arborvitae in that entire 5.5 feet.
No, not the entire 5.5
Well, to the end
feet,
of their
but there
building.
would be a solid wood fence as well as plantings such as arborvitae.
And how wide do you anticipate the bed will be for the arborvitae?
About 2 to 3 feet.
So then we're talking about an access easement of 2 to 3 feet wide for unit B to get to the front yard of unit C to use as their open space.
Correct. Yeah, pedestrian path. It's a path. That's correct.
So a 2 foot wide path is adequate for pedestrian access?
2.5 feet?
Yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't these problems be obviated if you just replace the former 2-family house with another 2-family house? You wouldn't have all these issues with unit B?
Well, we're seeing a significant amount of benefits in our view for this project, and we think that those benefits outweigh some of the constraints here.
I'm sorry, what are the benefits?
We'll provide that in additional testimony.
So you're going to.
Well, we're not finished with our planning testimony, so I can address that in a
Oh, okay.
little bit. Yeah.
Okay. I would just like to reserve, Madam Chairman, the right to ask additional questions then when we get to the planning aspect of the witness's testimony.
Yes,
I
sir.
believe that's all I have for now. Thank you.
So, Mr. Kennedy, do you have another expert?
Nope,
to testify?
it'll just be Mr. Kamalik. Again, he's done his engineering testimony, and we had extensive planning testimony on the prior variance configurations. We have some I would describe as wrap up or clean up planning testimony to relate the new way of looking to at the building and variances to what the previous testimony is. If you'd like to hear that now or after public comment, it's your discretion. But a few more minutes of that is what we have planned. But that will be it for experts this evening.
Mr. Mueller, do you have an opinion about timing of public
Yeah,
comment?
I think they should finish up their direct before we have the public make comments. They may be making
Great.
comments which become irrelevant.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
Thank you. That makes sense to me.
Thank you much. So Jim, I know we went through and I don't think we need to go through your entire outline again, because we did on most of the in the context of the bulk variances, coverage, for example, and the existing parking setbacks that allow the neighbors to park close to their homes. So I don't know if you have to get too much into that, but if you could just address particularly, with respect to Mr. Mueller's question, and I think we could probably turn unless you want to have your exhibit up while you're discussing it, perfect. But address the positive and negative impacts and just remind the board of I don't know if it's fair to say new variances, but the different way of looking at the list of variances following our discussions with the town's
Sure.
commissioners.
So in terms of the minimum lot area, as I previously discussed, that's really driven by the configuration of the lot and the parking area at the rear, number one, and matching the prevailing setback at the front, number two. So we have two sublots that are under the 3,000 square feet, but the overall area is met. And if we were able to, without these constraints that are specific and unique relative to the dimensions and constraints of this lot, then that parameter would be fully met. So we feel that the benefits of providing the applicant's parking at the rear, not encroaching on potential parking capacity within the easement, far outweighs the overall substandard nature of two of the lots being under the 3,000 square feet when the entirety is meets the 9,000 square foot minimum. Thereby, since we have provided the necessary amenities with the units, we don't see any substantial impact or detriment to the public good relative to that. With respect to the minimum lot depth for units A, B, and C as highlighted on our exhibit and the review memo, where 80 feet is required. And with this orientation, unit A 60.7, unit B 60.4, and unit C 59.4 being less than the ordinance, we feel that the arrangement of these three multifamily units in the context and directly opposite of the same oriented three dwelling units on the opposite side of the entry drive, again, from a planning standpoint and perspective, far outweigh that deviation from the lot depth. And I would further assert that if you took a look at our proposed 59 to 60.7 foot lot depth that is being proposed, and you compared it to the three dwellings that are on the opposite side of Humbert Place, or the access drive as I'm highlighting, their lot depths are approximately 31 feet, 34 feet, and 37 feet, about half of what's being proposed here. So what's being proposed here is slightly under the ordinance, but it certainly exceeds the lot depth of the adjacent dwellings in this immediate neighborhood with generally the same configuration. In terms of the minimum side yard for unit A, which has the front porch and has a side yard that fronts on Humbert Street, we feel that it is in keeping with the character of Humbert Street and the other buildings in the neighborhood, with the entrance located at that location, as well as the front porch, which is necessitating a variance for a setback down to 12 feet. And as I mentioned before, the pre-existing setback to the porch was 9 feet. So that pre-existing deviation at 9 feet is being increased to 12 feet with this project, basically minimizing that deviation or making that condition better than it was previously. So we see that as benefiting the neighborhood character, the public good, and the site aesthetics relative to the frontage of the property, and have not identified any substantial detriment to the zone plan or the public good relative to that variance request. In terms of the minimum rear yard setback for units A, B, and C, which are abutting on the previous interpreted side yard, we've provided testimony that the main facade is farther away from the property line than the dwelling that previously existed, to distances of 9.5 feet, 8 feet, and 9.5 feet. So that's being increased to the facade in terms of what was there previously, even though currently, since this would be considered a rear yard, a variance is required because it is less than the 25 feet. We would provide the board-on-board fence, as well as some associated plantings along that fence line, minimizing any substantial detriment to the public good or to the zone plan, as that setback has been increased. So in conclusion, it is our view that when we look at this immediate neighborhood, the existing lot configuration, the private access drive, and the fact that three adjacent lots have immediate frontage on this access driveway, the application, in our view, simply makes good common sense from a planning perspective. And we feel that it will have the following benefits. It will maintain access to the neighboring lots. It will provide opportunities for neighbor parking along the easement, driven by the fact that the new parking is put at the rear. That new parking is put at the rear, out of the way and out of sight. The project, as illustrated in the color rendering that we presented for Ms. Sachs, elevates and uplifts the aesthetics of the immediate neighborhood. It provides 3 new residential units to meet the needs of the Princeton housing stock. Its reconstruction will bring the property up to today's building codes and standards and will replace the early 20th century dwelling that previously existed that is certainly well below common building standards. We didn't talk about it much today, but as you recall, as a LEED certified building, it will provide a green residential building with sustainable green building components, 3 vehicle charging stations that will further Princeton's encouragement of green building and development within the municipality. In terms of the 1996 master plan, we feel it supports several goals to encourage the use of sound design and energy saving principles in new construction and redevelopment projects, of which this is to enhance the character and appearance of developed areas. Secondly, to provide for present and future housing needs within the Princeton community while retaining the small town quality and diversity of life within the community consistent with the vision of Princeton. In terms of reexamination report objectives, we identified that this project would support, in the fact that it's a redevelopment, the shortage of vacant developable land to meet the many competing needs of the community. It will provide opportunities for middle income housing and meeting the housing needs of a aging population, providing opportunities for those that may not want single family larger dwellings and properties to still age in place within Princeton. This would maintain a range of housing opportunities here within Princeton. Another reexamination report objectives, ensuring that redevelopment is compatible with existing development, again, based upon our view that these 3 units fit the configuration of the units directly across the street. We feel that this redevelopment is indeed compatible with the diverse housing that traverses Humbert Street. And lastly, it promotes sustainable building practices, which is a reexamination report objective. In terms of the Mercer County master plan, it promotes redevelopment, it promotes desirable compact design that promotes walkable communities. In terms of the green building environmental sustainability element of the master plan, in our view, it'll serve to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prioritize climate change resiliency interventions through the implementation of Princeton's climate plan via the incorporation of a certified LEED building. It'll follow green building practices. These are the goals of that element. Minimize landfill waste, which was undertaken very carefully during the demolition process of recycling appropriately all the structural members and elements of the pre-existing building. The building will be more energy efficient. That was discussed previously with several of the board members. And the project will include 1 electric vehicle charging station for every new parking space at the rear of the lot. So 3 new charging stations for the 3 new stalls. And that's also a goal of the green building element of the master plan. So we feel that although the arrangement and configuration may not be entirely conventional as an attached building, given its orientation to suit this unique location and area, we feel it meets the needs of this particular lot and the neighboring lots with the way that they are configured and fronting in this configuration. It's our view that this specific case, the variances are warranted and that the benefits of this redevelopment in the context of a new certified LEED certified green building would far outweigh any perceived impacts to the general welfare. And from our view, we haven't identified any substantial detriments to neighboring properties or to the zone plan. We just feel that this orientation here makes sense given these conditions and that it would support the purposes of zoning.
Thank you, Jim. If I may just ask one follow-up question. As a professional planner, at the original meeting, you provided very similar planning testimony to the original set of variances, concluding, I believe, just to recap, that those variances were similarly warranted. Has anything in your mind changed with these new way of looking at those variances from that earlier testimony?
No, in my view, there's been no substantial change. The project is largely entirely the same. However, with these additional administrative variances, I think we can still, at least from our view, reach the same conclusions.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that's it for direct from us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from board members on the testimony that was just given before we go to any public comment? Okay, Mr. Chow?
One question about the air conditioning units, given the proximity to the neighbors in the south. I would hope that you use variable speed scroll compressors on those, which are quiet compared to conventional air conditioners. So just for the sake of the noise, given the proximity, I would hope you use those type of variable speed compressors. Is that the case, or is that?
That's something we can certainly look into as part of the specification of that equipment. But relative to, my knowledge of that specification at this point in time, I'm not sure exactly what is specified, but we can take that under advisement and see if we can incorporate that into the plan.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions from members of the board, I'll open the meeting up for public comment. Any member of the public who would like to, Mr. Pigeon, did you?
Yes, yeah, because Mr. Kennedy asked if I put off
Sure.
the planning questions.
Yes,
Thank
sir,
you.
go right ahead. Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Mr. Chimilak, am I pronouncing your name right? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
First, with respect to what we're calling Humber Place, that's actually a driveway. It's not a public right of way, is it?
That's correct. It's an access driveway with an easement.
So this property actually fronts on Humbert Street.
That's correct.
Which means that the definitions you're using for front yard, rear yard, side yard, and lot depth are not consistent with the ordinance definitions. Is that true?
Well, we've considered them not in just one context, but in two contexts. One at the last meeting, the second at this meeting, in accordance with the town's review memo relative to that interpretation. So we've looked at it in both ways and provided testimony for both ways.
But those still aren't the ordinance definitions for front yard, rear yard, side yard, or lot depth, are they?
The ordinance, I believe, references a street.
Yes.
So we have Humbert Street and we have Humbert Place, which is a private access drive.
But it's not a street. That's okay, I'll move on. You said one of the benefits is it maintains access for the owners of the property, the two properties across Humbert Place, but they already have access, isn't that true?
Yes, they already have access. I was speaking of maintaining the availability of potential parking.
But they have parking now, don't they? They haven't had any parking issues up until this point in time, have they? To your knowledge?
I haven't observed necessarily any parking issues there, but my point is that the new parking is put in a different location, which is a good thing.
So, but you're adding one additional unit to that which was there before, and you're providing one parking space per unit. So you're going to add additional traffic, even though the ordinance only requires one parking space per unit. As a practical matter, those people may have 2 cars or more. So aren't you actually hindering access and parking on Humbert Place by having this additional unit instead of just a 2-family?
No, we're meeting the ordinance requirement for parking.
Now, the other benefit that you talked about was it will be LEED certified. Wouldn't that also be true with a two-family? So being LEED certified is not specific to building a three-family house. And in fact, by building a three-family house, you're having a greater negative impact on the environment in two areas. One, on the impervious coverage, you're proposing double the permitted impervious coverage, and you're providing less than the required open space, both of which are environmental concerns. So I don't understand why being LEED certified is a positive benefit to this proposed project.
We may just see that differently. We see that as a benefit.
But why is it different for a three-family than a two-family? Wouldn't the environmental impact of a two-family be less than this proposed three-family?
It depends really what the design of that is, what the context, what the square footage is. Really depends on the nature of some other application.
In fact, aren't all the benefits that you've set forth, none of them is specific to building a three-family as opposed to a two-family or even a one-family?
Well, I think we've identified some specific goals within the master plan that advocates supporting Princeton's various housing stock and providing various types of housing in different areas, given the fact that the remaining available land within the township is limited, therefore looking to redevelopment projects such as this. So we feel that we are supporting those intents and providing a benefit.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay. So now I think we can open the meeting to members of the public. If there are folks observing who would like to pose questions or express your views on what's been presented here tonight, these additional variances, et cetera, then now is your time to do it. You should click on the raise hand icon in the center, the bottom center of your screen, or if you're on the phone, press *9. Carrie, are there
Yes.
folks?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are 32 attendees and we only have one individual who has their hand raised. So I am
Okay.
promoting Michael Timmons over as a panelist.
Thank you.
Do we need the screen up anymore? Of the screen?
I don't think we do. If we need it, we can get it back.
Jim, can you take that down, please? Thank you.
Mr. Timmons, Mr. Mueller is going to swear you in.
If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
So sworn or affirm. Please state your full name and spell your last name.
Michael Timmons, Timmons.
Go right ahead, Mr. Timmons.
Thank you very much for all the discussion and allowing me to speak. I think Mr. Pigeon did a very nice job in pointing out one thing. And I'd like to go back to the baseline here, first principles, which is the R4. The way I understand the R4 zoning is supposed to be 2 units facing Humbert Street. And I think that was just skipped over to go directly to this 3-unit building, proposed building. I think it's beautiful. I'm very happy it's going to be LEEDs. I'm very happy with the way it looks. This neighborhood is very, very different from building to building, and I think it'll be an addition. However, I think the point is that the 2 units that are zoned for is exactly what should be going in there. You would have none of the same problems you have with 3 trying to shove 3 into that lot. and to try to bootstrap it by saying on the other side of this driveway, which it literally is a driveway, and say these three at least 100-year-old buildings gives you the ability to put three more buildings across the driveway is just wrong. And I think it should go back to two. And I heard benefits. I heard benefits that were clearly benefits to the community about additional housing, walking, all those things. However, I heard nothing that was particular to 3 versus 2. And the only benefit I can imagine is the increase in income that would be allowed for 3 units versus 2. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much, though, for listening.
Thank you. Carrie, are there any other folks with hands raised?
Yes, that would be Alan Goodhart. I will
Okay.
promote him.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, is he there?
I am not seeing
I see him on the screen.
Goodhart.
You see him, Derek?
I see him on the screen, but he's muted, excuse me.
Okay.
I
well,
am not,
can't-
oh, I see you on my second screen, Alan.
Where's-
Can you turn on your camera, please?
His camera's on now.
Oh,
Can you hear us?
No, I don't think it is on, Jerry. It's just a picture of him.
I see.
yes, that's a candy.
Okay. Yep.
Doesn't matter. I only
In the
have something
past-
brief to say. I have not been a party to
Okay.
these discussions in
Excuse me,
earlier
sir,
times.
sir,
Oh,
sir. I'm gonna swear you in. If you could raise your
Okay.
right hand. Okay, is your video working?
Start video. Does that help?
Yes,
Perfect.
sir. Thank
If
you
you could-
very much.
If you could raise your right hand.
Oh, there I am up in the corner.
Yeah.
That's
you-
my right hand.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Absolutely.
I so sworn or affirm. Please state your full name and spell your last name.
Alan Goodhart, AlanGoodHeart.
Thank you.
Go right ahead.
I'm a landscape architect, and that's what I want to talk about. It's a very interesting project. I see a lot of problems, so variances in this project, and also there's going to be another one for you guys later. But you really need a serious landscape plan, and it's almost more important for a tight site than a generous site. There's lots more variables on a big site. The south side space is only big enough for stairs to get out, a walkway, and 2 feet for a fence and some vines on it. But that can be beautiful. It's very simple. It only does what it's supposed to do. So if you get to that plan, you got to do something like that. Then you got to find some place to get some big trees in the back so you have shaded backyard and something in the front. It just got to have a serious plan. It didn't look like you got that. And Dan Dobromilski, when you started signing in tonight, he was down there at the bottom somewhere. Maybe he's just waiting for the next one. But get him, insist, the planning board, he isn't automatically asked to look at plans. I do know that. But he's a regular consulting landscape architecture. I've worked with him for a long time. And the planning board, I recommend you make sure he looks at it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can be sure that if this is approved, Mr. Dobromilski will have a lot to say about the landscape plan.
I certainly
We
hope so.
rely on him heavily and respect him as much as you do, so thank you.
You're great.
Okay, there are 31 members in the audience and one person, Mr. Jim Ross, would like to speak. So I'm moving him over.
Thanks, Carrie.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Yeah, Mr. Ross, I think you were sworn in the last time, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Jim Ross. I live at 20 Humber Street, right across the street from the proposed complex. I just had a few comments. One is Mr. Chimak, who's, I guess, the planner, said something about the common standards about, in talking about the 3 units that are across Humbert Place, that are the 3 existing units. And unless I heard incorrectly, drawing a comparison or a similarity to what's been proposed. And they are nothing at all like what is being proposed. There's 2 different units. One's a duplex, one's a single. They're much more narrow, they're more setback. So I don't see that as fitting in with that at all. Has it been discussed, or should it be discussed, or does it make any difference if these are for sale or for rental? Is it a question I had?
Just very quickly, there was testimony at the first hearing, just to quickly recap. The plan and intention with almost 100% certainty is that these would be rental units.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I just hadn't heard it confirmed. I don't know. I'd like to, I think I mentioned this last time, and I don't know what board members have or have not, or if they intend to, but to walk the property and take a look at what we're dealing with here. The mock-up, whatever the right phrase is, that was shown of the proposed, the sketches, I guess you'd call them, which showed the side facing Humbert Street. And that angle is taken from the, I guess, from the north. I realize it's just a mock-up. One does not see Humbert Place and doesn't see what's across the street and see what's narrow there. It all looks very nice, but it doesn't really show that what we're doing is, as Mike Timmons says, we're trying to jam 3 units into a place that was made for 2 at the most. I don't know if this can be seen or not, but this is what is presently sitting in that yard. You can see that there's heavy equipment, which actually has been sitting there for months. So I'm not trying to nitpick, but for anybody talking about concern for the neighborhood and concern for Princeton, this is, you see a truck back there that's been sitting there for 2 years. So I would really, I can't insist, but I would implore the board to walk this property with these plans and sit and look at them and say, can this really work in here? Is this going to fit in here? Does somebody want this center unit, which is going to be, it's difficult from the car. You won't be able to park your car in front of it. You'll be at one end, you'll be at the other end. So that's what I would ask you folks to do, to take a look at it. And you can also see the 3 units across Humbert Place are nothing in comparison to what we're talking about in the proposal. The only thing I have to say, I'm not certainly no expert on this, but in reading the notice that came, the supplemental notice, and it was mentioned earlier by Mr. Pigeon, I believe, that the maximum impervious coverage, 36% permitted, 70.9% proposed. To me, it's a money grab. It's, again, just let's take the property. We have ordinances. What do they mean if everything is going to be a variance, especially double? It seems to me to be overkill and trying to wedge a lot into a space, into a lot that is really for a 2 unit, not a 3. And I believe that's what I have to say. Thank you.
And Mr. Ross, if you could make a copy of that photograph that you just showed the board and submit it to the planning staff, I'd appreciate that, because it should be part of the record. And I'm gonna have that virtually marked as Exhibit 01.
Okay. And where should I send it?
You would send it to Kerry Phillip, Philip.
FH, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Philip.
At,
And she's at the planning department, 400 Witherspoon Street.
oh, okay, all right. I will do that.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Phillip, are there any other members of the public who have raised their hand to speak?
No, I do not see any.
Okay, going once, going twice.
Oh, Bruce Lawton just put his hand up.
Okay, and I would ask if anyone else thinks you may want to speak, please put your hand up now so that we have a sense of how many folks.
Madam Chair, and just to clarify, this is commentary or questions about what was presented this evening, right? Not previously?
Yeah, that's correct. Is
Because we
that,
closed-
that's correct, Mr. Mueller?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Mr. Laplace.
Hello. I believe I spoke last time, so I was sworn in.
Okay.
I won't take up a lot of your time. I just want to, I live at 51 Hawthorne, but I know Humbert very well. And I just, once again, want to offer my support to the others that just spoke, as well as John Pigeon. I concur with pretty much everything that they're saying. It really, it needs to be, there's no reason that there shouldn't be a duplex rather than a triplex that goes in there. It just seems quite obvious. And I just, again, want to offer my support and my, whatever else you'd like to call it, to that. And that's basically it. I won't take up a lot of your time. I just wanted to add an extra voice to that side of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton.
Now, Mr. Ross had raised his hand again, but I don't know if that was accidental, but typically we don't do that, except another. Should I give him another moment, or how would you like me to handle this?
Why don't you bring him back in?
Thank you.
Ms. Ross, you're on mute. Or I'm sorry if I'm calling you by the wrong name.
No, that's okay.
No, you
No,
got
that's
the right name. No, we didn't have it, it's under his name because I'm on his iPad. So,
Understood.
yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to voice
You
my
need to be
opinion.
sworn in.
Ms. Ross,
first.
Yeah, I was not sworn in last time, so.
Okay, if you could raise your right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Okay, so
do.
sworn or affirm. Please say your full name, spell your last name.
Okay, Ann Ross, and I'm Jim's wife, and I live at 20 Humbert, which is directly across from the proposed site. We moved to Princeton a few years ago, and our choice for Princeton was because of its quaintness, its charm, and the character that it exuded. And honestly, I'm not sure that this property will do that, jamming 3 into a 2. I just feel like it's not the right thing to do. I know last night we spent a long time listening to the Franklin Street proposal. And one of the most important things was to have the residents have an outside green area and to have open space, which is so important. I understand building with green materials is important, but the environment is also. And I just feel that this does not fit that bill. And that was such an important part of the planning and what went into it. It went on for a long time. And I just feel this could really compromise the integrity of the street and the aesthetics on the street. It will look jammed in. And the house, even though it's going to have a porch, it will not really look like the front of a house that all the other houses do have on the street. And the only other thing I did want to say too is the pattern of the houses across on Humbert Place is not the same. That pattern has a huge grassed-in lot that faces Humbert Street. The houses are set back into the middle or the even further back than this proposed site. This site will be right on the street. And I just feel that it's going to be taking away from something special that was part of this street and the charm of it. And I also think that this really needs to be considered. I think there's many old houses in Princeton that will at one point probably be demolished and other houses will be built. And if all of these variances are allowed to squeeze in 3 when it's clearly a 2-family lot, then that precedent will be set. And I hope that it's not set. That's all. And I'm happy if they do 2. I would be thrilled. It would be wonderful. But the 3 is just, I feel, too much. And I don't know if I would have bought this house if I had seen that across the street, very honestly. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And I hope you take everything into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Ms. Phillip, anyone else?
No, no one else.
Okay, then I will close the public portion of the meeting, or close the meeting to public comment at this time. And open up board discussion. Mr. O'Donnell?
Okay, I have a question that's I think primarily for Mr. Bridger and Mr. Purcell, and that's regarding, I just want to go over the R4 zoning again. And the wording that we've been given is that attached dwellings were envisioned side by side facing the street. Can you give me any clarification on what exactly envisioned might be and how beholden we are to that particular word?
I'll take a shot. I mean, the zoning envisions having these end units have a 20-foot setback. And it's just the traditional townhouse development you would see in many towns. That is my opinion of how the zoning in the R4 works for attached dwellings. And ideally there would be space behind each dwelling with the setbacks provided under that R4 zoning, and side space as well.
Okay.
Anything to add, Mr. Purcell, or I guess this is really a Bridger question?
Now Jim is welcome to.
Well, and when I use the word envision, I meant that, zoning is typically looked upon as the front yard fronts on the street, the rear yard is behind the front yard, the side yards are adjacent to the adjacent property lines. So when the zoning ordinance was written, the vision was that these attached dwellings, or any attached dwellings, would have the front on a street. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't apply the same standards if you turn it sideways, if you get my meaning. I'm moving toward what the intent of the ordinance was, that each of the different units had specific requirements like a rear yard and a front yard and size, regardless of what the orientation is to the adjoining street. That may be something the planning board doesn't agree with, but that was how we applied this ordinance based on what we thought would have been the intent if those who were drafting the ordinance had thought of it in this manner.
And I would just add to that zoning usually takes into account what you would call the average or normal situation in a zone, but there's always these unique lots that pop up, particularly in an older town like Princeton. This is a particularly deep lot, for instance. And it's also interesting to consider that, there's private streets and then there's public way. There's public streets and there's private ways. Humbert Place has 3 houses, or three dwelling units facing it. And that's already an existing situation. So just more things for the board to think about.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing, just in terms of the interpretation of the ordinance. If there is a required front yard and a required rear yard, you cannot have that when you have three units going one behind the other. The middle unit is not going to have a front yard or a side yard, a front yard or a rear yard. And the rear unit is not going to have a front yard. And the front unit is not going to have a rear yard. I mean, so I don't think you can, I don't think you interpret it any other way than has been interpreted by staff. And Derek, I think, hit the nail on the head when he said early on, it's the only real way you can interpret it. And that's at least my view.
Ms. Sachs?
Yeah, I'm coming at this from the perspective of having spent most of the past 2 years working to implement our affordable housing settlement, and apropos of the Franklin site mentioned last night. So I'm acutely aware of where we're going as a community, which is increasingly people in subsidized housing and people in very expensive housing. And to the point about needing to find, create housing in the middle swath throughout the town, we are desperately, desperately in need of that. And I understand where the people who live nearby, I understand their concerns, but looking at the big picture of what we need as a town and where we need to go, we need smart growth. That's what this is. I'm really impressed at the way the applicant architect has worked to smartly position this in a way that, in my opinion, does maintain the character of the neighborhood. I'm really appreciative of our staff from having spent so much time helping the applicant to design that. I'm reminded tonight of how difficult it is to use zoning as a tool to fit something into a neighborhood that was built before zoning existed, and the mathematical complexities that involves. We have a choice as a town. Either we're going to become a gated community, or we're going to build in areas that probably should be preserved, or we're going to build, apropos of other topics tonight, or we're going to build smartly and sustainably in our core in a way that allows a wider swath of people of different backgrounds and economic backgrounds. And that means that everyone has to make some sacrifices. And sometimes that means allowing one more unit, because it's going to require one more unit in a variety of spaces in order for us to grow in a way that we need to. And otherwise, we're going to end up left with building large multifamily units and squeezing those into small spaces. And I think I much prefer the plan, the plan of growing with one unit throughout neighborhoods and squeezing that in, rather than squeezing large multifamily units into a small space. So thank you, Mr. Gugliani, for your patience in dealing with the town. And thank you, I can't pronounce your name, Mr. The architect. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I think you really did a great job. And thank you, Jim. I know, and Derek, and Michael, so it's not easy. So I support this, and I think it's an example of how we need to grow in a genuinely smart way.
Thanks, Mia. Mr. Quinn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To answer a comment from the Rosses, yes, I have walked Humbert many times. As I think I spoke in the first part of this hearing, that I had a personal connection and that my son for a time attended after school at Mrs. Brooks's house, which is the house that was torn down at the lot that's in question here. And so I got to know the neighborhood a little bit, and some of the comments that we heard initially about this building, someone called it Soviet style, and someone said that it looked like workforce housing. If you go back and look at the history of Humbert, it was built in around the turn of the 20th century. It's mentioned first as New Street, and apparently it got its name from the son of one of the original residents, whose name was Umberto. So there were mostly Italian immigrants who moved from John Street. A notable Princetonian, Bill Cerullo, who was the principal of Riverside School, grew up on Humbert Street. His aunt and uncle and cousins lived next door. My understanding is that his cousins still own a property on Humbert Street. So it was workforce housing. I don't think that any of the original residents of Humbert Street were doctors or lawyers. I think knowing a little bit about the Italian community in Princeton, that they were most likely stonemasons and laborers. So that's a long way around of saying that I support this one additional unit on the street. I don't think it will compromise the character of the neighborhood. As as someone who comes from generations of row house dwellers in Philadelphia, there's a place for these kinds of multi-units. And I think Councilwoman Sachs's comments were well taken. The population of New Jersey is going up. It has gone up in the last census. More people would like to move to Princeton. And I think that's going to be some repurposing of existing land and building smaller units rather than building large single-family homes, as is happening in my neighborhood. And I live in Jugtown on Wilton Street, which has a mix of multi-unit housing and duplexes. So I think that there's a substantial good in this application. I think that redefining the setbacks and what's a front yard and what's a side yard. I think the case that the houses across Humbert Lane will face in the same direction as the new proposed front yards of the 3 units. And I think that was a puggle there, Councilwoman Sachs, in the front yard there. So I think given the history of the neighborhood, and I'm going way back in the history of the neighborhood, I think that a multi-unit structure that's more than 2 units is a good thing. And if it provides, I'm not sure, don't want to speculate about what the market for these apartments will bring, but I would think that we would have families living within walking distance to schools, to our great public library. I think the more open space in that lot, accommodating for open space there, since there's no park immediately nearby. I see a lot of good in this application, and unless I can hear otherwise from any of my colleagues on the board, I intend to vote yes.
Mr. Oakman has his
Other-
hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not see that. Mr. Oakman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief. I wanted to echo, what the Councilwoman Sachs said. I think that she was on point, as was Mr. Quinn. And for me, I mean, I admit I was a little skeptical of this application at first, for the exact reasons we've talked about in terms of the orientation towards the side lane. But I think in listening to the discussion, I've kind of realized that this is a somewhat unique condition here, and an opportunity to do this in a way that makes sense and is not, I don't think is creating a horrible precedent that we're going to see, a lot of these kind of developments around town in places where they aren't appropriate. I think this is a place where it makes sense because of the conditions, but also because, I mean, we sort of have to be, we have to acknowledge the fact that this is like 2 blocks or less than 2 blocks from the part of town where people live in multifamily apartment buildings. And so, I think if we actually are going to be able to grow smartly, we have to accept that, and we have to say that, like, this is a part of town that you move to for the urban connection and access more than for bucolic views and open space, which are very nice things, but they're not, they're not necessarily going to be able to be preserved in a place of this location, when all the things that the councilwoman said are things that this town needs to do. And it sort of leads me to a question, kind of a rhetorical question for this group, which is, if we can't do this, if we can't add 1 unit in this location that's a block from downtown Princeton, like, what good is the ADU ordinance we just passed? Like, how would we ever implement that if this is something that we get hung up on? And so, and I think that we all agreed when that was passed, or most of us did, that there was a lot of value there in terms of achieving the goals that Mia was talking about. And so I'll leave it there, but I will support this, because I think it's a small step in the direction that we need to be going towards smart growth.
Okay, now
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Mr. Pigeon had raised his hand before, and we also have Mr. Texarney who just raised his hand. So,
Mr. Pigeon, why don't you let the board continue its conversation right now? I won't forget you, but I mean, unless you have a question specifically for Oakman or.
No, that's fine. I just wondered when we were going to be able to sum up. So thank you.
Well, I want anybody who wants to express their views to do so. I know I will. Zanan?
Yeah, I'll be brief also. I agree with what everybody has said on the board so far. I support approving this project. I mean, I also don't, I feel like it's not that big of a deal. I think that, I understand that for neighbors, it might seem like a big change, but I really don't think that it's going to be that much of a difference. And I also think that, as far as, zoning is concerned, I think that this situation is unique. I mean, I think the whole entire neighborhood is kind of unique and eclectic also. If you look at the surrounding area, you have all types of situations. So I think that there's plenty of precedent, especially right across the place, or, street, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that, there's more than enough reason to make an exception. I don't think that this is going to be some sort of Pandora's box for, the whole entire town, disregarding the zoning. But I do think that, we need to look at, how we can creatively add more density in a smart way closer to downtown, because this is where density belongs. So with that said, I intend to vote to approve it.
Other board member comments? Mr. Purcell, did you?
Madam Chair, I would just like to make one more technical clarification. There have been some comments made this evening about the other buildings on this street being set back further from Humbert Street. I think there may be some confusion, and I just want to make sure that everybody understands when we talk about setback, we talk about setback from the property line, not from the street. And in fact, all of the homes on this street are set back less than 15 feet from their property lines along Humbert Street. So, and there is area along Humbert Street that makes it appear that there's a larger yard space between the street and the house. This application is in line with all of the other homes. So I just want everybody to be clear on that, because I've heard comments saying that the other homes are set back further, and they're not. They're actually set back almost identical to this application.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member comments? I'm not seeing any hands go up. I'll just share a few of my own thoughts. The things I like about this project, I'm perfectly comfortable with 3 units. I very much agree with the principles and comments laid out by Ms. Sachs, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Oakman, and Mr. Texarney about missing middle and density, and I very much appreciate the green building standards and environmental ethic that have gone into this. I have no problem with unconventional. What I'm hung up on, to use Mr. Oakman's term, I think, is exceeding the allowable under the zoning impervious cover by 100% plus. And I feel like 3 units might have been fit into a much smaller overall building if it were a bit taller, and 2 of them faced Humbert Street and the third, faced the rear, or something like that. I'm not trying to design for folks, but I feel like that unit B in the middle is clearly lacking in terms of its access to open space. If you put arborvitae along the fence, it's just not going to leave any space at all. And people should be able to look out their windows at green, ideally. I'm not saying that plants don't belong there. I just think that, the thought wasn't put into what would actually fit there. And so that raises other sort of questions in my mind. And going forward, I know I'm expressing a minority view about this application, but going forward, I'd much rather see variances that where buildings go a little bit higher to achieve density than spread out over so much of the lot. And this is a really interesting eclectic neighborhood that within a stone's throw of several different types of housing, and that's one of the things I really like about it. I've walked over there, as many others have. So I guess to repeat, unconventional, good. 3 units, good. I'm all good with that. Environmental LEED certification, all great. I just don't like the mass of it and exceeding the bulk requirement or limit by, going from 35 to 71%. And I don't like the precedent that sets. Even in the real downtown, where I totally agree there needs to be more accommodation of more dwellings for more people that can get where they're going on foot. That's all.
So Louis, I don't have my hand up. I see Mia also had her finger up. I know that there was discussion about putting in a rain garden. I think that, I don't know where that went, because that was the last hearing. But, you know, I do have concerns about the dry wells. You know, they do tend to fail over time.
Yep.
And so, you know, I think that taking a naturalized approach is a better approach. And I think that there's some space behind the parking. I don't know if the applicant amended their landscaping plan, but I think that that could be a better way to deal with the stormwater issue.
And I just wanted to actually respond specifically to Louise's comment, because I don't disagree with that. But I can say that if the applicant were trying to, and my next question is to our planning staff, if what sort of variances would have been possible, or is it even possible now in our zoning code for the applicant to do, is what Louise is proposing possible? But before I get to that question, I just want to say that, Louise, I can assure you that if they were building vertically, there would not be 3 people here, there would be 300 people here.
Well, when I say vertically, I don't mean like units on, I just mean like 3 stories instead of 2.5. I mean, the building next door to it is a good bit taller than what's proposed here. So I don't mean like, you know, mid-rise, way higher than everything else in the neighborhood at all. I just mean, yeah, sorry, I interrupted you, and that's not fair.
No. But it is amazing how threatened people are by height. So, you know, there's definitely a preference, I would say, in Princeton for even looking at a parking lot as opposed to something that has even the slightest bit of height. So, but I'm wondering, to our planning staff, to Louise's point, yes, I mean, genuinely smart growth means building with an eye towards more height, so you can preserve more of the pervious you know, ground around it. Would it in theory have been possible for an applicant to build vertically on this site? Derek?
I'll take
The
a
height
first
was,
shot at it.
recently increased when we did the neighborhood character on attached dwellings from 35 feet to 40 feet. But they're currently at 32, 3, you know, I don't know. They could have possibly built another story with a flat roof, you know, but they're already up at the FAR, so the building could have gone up and they could have shrunken the footprint, but that's for their architect to address. But it did, the town did raise it, and rightly so, 3 years ago to 40 feet from 35.
Just because I think it's not fair to applicants to say, you know, we'd love for you to do something if it's not actually possible under our code. It just seems unfair.
Fair enough.
And I would also add that I think it's important for all of us to consider the character of this particular neighborhood. The buildings do tend to take up a large percentage of their lots, particularly as you move south towards the center of town. I'd also note that a block away is Princeton Cemetery, which is a very large open space. So, you know, that sort of has an inherent benefit to the neighborhood because it's a large green space with lots of trees.
Passive green space, though.
Yes, not active.
Extremely passive.
Restful
Yeah,
ones.
But to Mia's point, I mean, yeah, I think that it would be great to see, you know, obviously this ship has sailed, but you know, in the future, as we look to, you know, how we can, you know, update zoning and whatnot, you know, how we can potentially build in a way where, yeah, it's maybe smaller units, denser, like the property next door, where, I mean, and also many homes on Hamilton and Wiggins that actually house a lot of the graduate students that, and, you know, faculty that work at the university. And they don't, you know, many of them don't own cars. They just walk to campus. And so I think that, you know, I would love to see kind of more development like that, you know, where, you know, it's kind of accommodating smaller units and more people potentially and less footprint. Yeah.
Okay, so let's try to conclude this. Are there any other comments from members of the planning board or staff? Mr. Quinn, you're on mute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To revisit Mr. Chow's comment about the air conditioning, I think that's beyond the purview of the board to make as a condition. Is that correct, Jerry?
I would not agree with that. I think that you can take into consideration what the impacts will be on neighboring properties. So I think we can impose an appropriate condition.
So I would suggest that I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I think in a tight space that Mr. Chow's thinking about especially after the 3 or 4 days that we've had recently, that might be worth making a condition.
Mhm.
Mr. Chow, your audio is garbled. There you go.
I'll add that if it is LEED certified, and you're using heat pumps, most likely those are scroll compressors, and those are the quiet ones. So most likely, I think, without an actual HVAC designer here, my guess is it's most likely already a heat pump and that it's going to be quiet, but we could have it as a condition.
Yeah, I would suggest the condition be kind of general in the sense that basically they use equipment which will minimize the noise that's generated by it, and it'd be subject to the review and approval of the land use attorney. Sound okay?
Yes.
What he said.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, just for the record, we've been trying to figure out offline what the plan was, and it sounds like that is certainly acceptable. It was a heat pump type unit. That sounds like the type that Board Member Chow was suggesting. We were just trying to figure out amongst ourselves. We didn't bring back the green consultant for this meeting, but that condition sounds good to us.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Sachs and then Mr. Texarney.
I just want to address the comment about this being a money grab. And it's very expensive to build housing. We need more housing in Princeton, unless the residents of the town expect the town to go into the business of building housing, in which case it would be Soviet style, along the lines of what Mr. Quinn said. I just think that's a very odd approach to this. We all live in houses which someone at some point spent money to build, and we benefit from that. And that is the reality of how housing gets built. So I just want to make that comment.
Mr. Texarney.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, to just kind of characterize the developer as like greedy and that's all that they're looking for, and that's why the project is bad. I don't think that's fair. I mean, I think that it's a good project and it will benefit and provide homes for people. And so, but I wanted to just quickly bring back the issue of the rain garden. I was just wondering if the engineering professionals could quickly speak to that, and whether that we could potentially put that as a condition, like whether it's feasible, whether it makes sense to put that there.
And that's rather than the dry wells, correct, Zenon?
I was saying in addition to the dry wells.
Oh, in addition to the dry wells. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr.
If I may,
Purcell.
Zenon, there really isn't space. They would have to take away space from the open space that we just had a presentation on. That they're limited in the amount of open space for the dwellers to use. If they were to put in a rain garden, they'd be taking it away from that open space.
Well, I mean, I think it would be part of the open space. I was thinking like behind the parking spaces, not like that square, but
there's about 5 feet between them and the property line, and I don't think that we would want them to put a drainage system in behind the parking area.
Okay, well, if it's your judgment that it won't work, I thought that there was more space, but okay.
But your point is well taken, Zenon, and I know Mr. Purcell is not a huge fan of dry wells either. But
and Mr. Kamalik knows that quite well.
yes, there again, though, if it were a different configuration altogether with 3 decent sized dwellings and more open space, there perhaps would be more room for, okay, I'm just harping on a point I made before. Does any, without, okay, Ms. Capozzoli.
Oh, yes, I was just thinking I'm also in support of the smart growth, and I was just thinking about the landscape, and if maybe the landscape subcommittee could revisit this after a staff review, if it were to be approved.
Yeah, I agree that that would be important. Thank you.
So the landscape plan would be subject to the review and approval of the municipal landscape architect and the landscape committee.
Yes. Other comments, or would anyone like to
Madam Chair,
make a motion?
I think you had
Mr.
said that
Laplace?
Mr. Pigeon, I think you had said Mr. Pigeon.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Pigeon, did you have? I thought your comment before was just to ask how much longer we were going to have comments.
No. My
But if you had
comment
more,
was,
okay.
no, my comment was when Mr. Kennedy and I were going to be able to give summations. But it seems like it's after the vote at this point in time, but for the record, if I may.
Yes, please.
Before I sum up, I'd like to respond to 2 points made by the members of the board. One is that in my experience, neither COA, when it was in existence, nor the courts would ever approve a development like this with so little open space. In fact, COA and the special masters in this last round have required amenities for affordable housing. The second point with respect to that is that there's nothing in the record about what the rents are going to be charged for these apartments. So you're just speculating that it's going to be middle income. But unlike housing that's part of your fair share plan, there are going to be no income restrictions like there are for low and moderate income households. There are going to be no rent limits. So really, you're just speculating, and there's no guarantee that this is going to serve any particular population. With that said, I would like to sum up, and it's been clear from the testimony of my clients as well as some of the other neighbors, both tonight and back in May, the neighbors don't object to developing this property. It's just this particular plan. This proposed 3-family is just too big for this lot, which is why it needs so many variances. I think at last count, there were about 10 bulk variances. There's no reason a 2-family could not be constructed to replace the now demolished 2-family. And in fact, there was a concept plan circulated several years ago. And as Madam Chair suggested, there are other ways this could have been configured without having double the amount of permitted impervious coverage. I also submit that the applicant is not satisfied either the positive or negative criteria for its testimony. First, with respect to C1 variances, some testimony was given by Mr. Chwalik at the last meeting, and that requires that there be a showing of peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties to or exceptional and undue hardship upon the applicant arising out of the exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific piece of property, or by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or physical features uniquely affecting a specific piece of property. In fact, none of those conditions exist here. It's a regularly shaped rectangular lot. The frontage on Humbert Street is similar to the other lots on the street. There are no exceptional topographic conditions, so there's nothing preventing this applicant from constructing something that doesn't require 10 bulk variances, including impervious coverage, which is an extremely important one. And as pointed out earlier, no one's accusing the applicant of being greedy, but a hardship is not a financial hardship. It's got to be one of those hardships specified in the MLUL that I just recited. With respect to C2 variances, as you know, that's a balancing test, whether the purposes of the municipal land use law would be advanced by a deviation from the zoning ordinance requirements, and the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment. But the only real benefit that is in the record is this so-called lead building. And as I brought out during my cross-examination, that could be applied to a 1-family or 2-family or a 3-family with a different configuration. That's not specific to this proposed development. And as I said, in fact, not only is that not specific to this proposed development, but this actually has an adverse impact on the environment by not providing sufficient open space and also providing or having too much impervious coverage. With respect to the negative criteria, I submit that there is a substantial detriment to the public good and to the neighborhood. When I think it was Mr. Ross was talking about setback, he wasn't talking about the houses on Hubbard Street. He was talking about the 3 structures on Hubbard Place, that they're set back further from the road. One is a 2-family and one is a 1-family. They're nowhere near the scale of this proposed building. And this proposed building is inconsistent with those structures and the present character of that street. And those buildings are, as I understand it, more than 100 years old. And in fact, the staff has recognized even tonight that the intent of the zoning ordinance is to have the front face Hubbard Street. There's no reason that there couldn't be a 2-family facing Hubbard Street. And as Mrs. Wilson said earlier, you could have a 3rd one if you insisted on having a 3-family, either face Hubbard Place or to the rear as proposed now. But under this proposed configuration, as I said earlier, Unit C or Unit B has no backyard, has no open space, and there's really, as a practical matter, a 5.5-foot wide easement through Unit C's backyard. Once you put in shrubs and a fence, they're going to have to walk sideways to get back to behind Unit C. And I think this was brought out at the first hearing. That's really the front yard of Unit C. The residents in Unit B aren't going to be comfortable going down and sitting in front of the front porch of the people who live in Unit C. Finally, as I said, I don't think the applicant is satisfied with either the positive or negative criteria. This proposed project is just too big for this lot. It requires too many bulk variances, and they could easily be mitigated by coming up with another plan. And under the circumstances, I respectfully ask you to deny the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy?
I will be very, very brief, Madam Chairwoman. And mostly just to perhaps give you some additional comfort, if I may. We believe, and there was testimony about C1 and C2 bulk variances here, but I really just want to stress how unique this lot is, in particular in regard to the impervious coverage. You know, the second road that we've been focusing on, Humbert Place, whether we front to Humbert Street or Humbert Place conceptually, like the 3 neighboring properties do, that road is on this property. The pervious coverage of that road, where the neighbors park and where their, in some cases, deeded parking spaces are, is on this lot. So while back 2 hearings ago, we heard testimony about coverage in the neighborhood, there were several lots that whose coverage numbers exceed this proposal, many of which are many lots still with coverage in a range around what we're proposing. But what the uniqueness of this lot is that the road for the neighborhood is coverage on this lot, and the other neighborhood lots that don't front on anything other than that driveway or have parking on anywhere on that driveway use that. And that is a pre-existing condition. That is a unique feature of this lot that I hope, as you're doing some, you're completing your deliberations, at least gives you some comfort that this is not some, again, while every application stands on itself, but this is not some open door to coverage Christmas here in the neighborhood or in Princeton. This lot is quite unique with respect to coverage. I think some interesting points were made on height. We did look at that early on. I think we would be before the zoning board, frankly, with a height variance, even with the newer 40-foot standard to squeeze this in to a more vertical application. But even then, we would not have downsized in terms of coverage that much, because the road and driveway and parking for the neighboring properties is going to be there regardless. So a big chunk of that 70% that admittedly is large, though not necessarily out of step with the neighborhood, is dealing with the neighborhood's parking and access. And that with additional height wouldn't go away. That would still be there. And again, I as you're deliberating, I think everyone understood this completely. If this applicant doesn't do the third unit here, we're losing a unit. That third unit, if this were to be a duplex, is not going to be. We won't find a spot for that elsewhere. And it's just a great opportunity, I think, as you've all picked up on, to understand the goals of Princeton's master plan to create that opportunity in this walkable downtown adjacent neighborhood where it fits. I appreciate that you've recognized that. And again, I just hope that additional commentary on coverage gives you a little bit more comfort that this is not a door opening to these kind of coverage numbers elsewhere. The existing coverage is already quite high. But again, it's that road that significantly puts this lot out of whack rather than the building. And again, so thank you all for your consideration and your time tonight, especially as volunteers. I'm much appreciative.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Okay, now are we ready for a motion and a vote? Mr. McGowan?
Does Mr. Mueller have to read the conditions before we vote? Because conditions are going to go along with what we're going to vote on.
That
Right. Yeah. The
absolutely
motion,
true.
the motion
So,
should
Mr.
include conditions. Should I start going through them?
Well,
Yes, please.
I think, don't you first need a motion to have conditions with, Don't you have to have the motion first and then add the conditions?
Well, I think you probably could do it either way, but I think the practice we usually use, which I think is a better one, is I lay out the conditions, and basically the board tells me if they don't want a condition. If they don't, we exclude it. If they do, we keep it. And then the motion says the conditions that we've just gone through, plus here it would be minus site plan approval. And I counted actually 16 variances from Jim and Derek's memo.
Yeah, I was just getting confused because talking about the conditions first presumes that it's an approval, right?
Well, I would just lay these out as potential conditions that can be included in the motion. I think it's a better way of going.
Yeah, because I agree with that, because without knowing that, people can't be confident that their yes or no vote is what they think it is.
Well, and somebody's making a motion and not sure what it is.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So yes, go right ahead, Barry.
Minus site plan approval. The 16 variances, 13 of them are on the chart that Derek and Jim prepared on page 2 of their most recent memo, plus the 3 additional ones they lay out just below the chart, and the following conditions, and we'll go through them. And if the board doesn't want one, they should let me know. The first is should use an air conditioning system that will minimize noise, such as a heat pump, subject to the review and approval of the land use attorney. We talked about that. Then second, going through my notes first. Landscape plan subject to review and approval by the municipal landscape architect, that's Dan, and the landscape committee. Then shifting over to the reports, these are the earlier reports. And I'm now, and they're mainly in Jim and Derek's memo of March 30th. The applicant must replace the Coosa dogwood with another species of tree. Cornus dogwood, I'm sorry. Oh, no, Cornus, Coosa.
Cornus is the Latin name, Coosa is the type. So are they wanting a different type that's not invasive, not considered invasive?
Exactly right. So that's one. And as I said, people should yell if there's a particular condition that they don't think should be included. Maintenance plan for the stormwater management system is provided on the plans, but must also be included in the homeowners association documents. Applicant should replace the sidewalk on Humbert Street along the entire lot frontage. The easement agreement that I think is included with the plans must be revised to clarify ingress and egress and the rights of the parties regarding use and parking, and that would be subject to my review and Jim's. Then they have a sewer calculation fee, comes out to $12,411. Then the summary of conditions of approval, I think these are all ones which were not picked up. Oh, the access easement revised to clarify the ingress and egress, obviously I already had that. Then deed of consolidation combining lots 23, 72, and 73 shall be executed. That obviously be subject to Jim's approval and mine. Then we talked about the sidewalk, the dogwood, the maintenance plan. The applicant shall not commence construction prior to 8 a.m., shall cease construction activity no later than 6 p.m. No construction may take place on Sundays except upon issuance of a permit by the municipal engineer as to site work or building official as to other work. That's a standard condition. Obviously, applicant shall submit to municipal engineer an estimate of the cost of construction of the site improvements for determination of any required performance guarantees and inspection fees. Sewer connections shall be paid prior to the issuance of building permits. Going back to my notes of the prior meeting, the PowerPoint presentation, which is A1, the plans have to be consistent with that and related testimony unless inconsistent with any conditions. And that's kind of a standard condition we've adopted. 3 EV charging stations, Jim, is that already on the plan? It is, so we don't have to put that. Was the sidewalk north of the building to be all impervious pavers? I have a note that it was, but I'm not sure.
Jim, can you confirm that?
Yeah, I believe there was.
Okay.
It was proposed to be pervious.
Okay, so that's a sidewalk north of the building. Incorporate some of the foundation stone into the landscaping. Okay. Native species trees only, subject to the municipal arborist approval. Then the modified easement we had talked about. And the now compacted gravel will be paved asphalt. Is that already on the plans?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so I don't have to put that. I know Mr. Cohen, before he recused himself, had talked about the very deep parking spaces, have less of a radius, reduce the length of the parking spaces, but that's already been done on the revised plans, correct?
Correct.
So those are reflected on the revised exhibit, as is the previously agreed to what would have been a condition for the front porch. So just to clarify, neither of those things were on the exhibit 1, but were shown on the revised, what we'll call, exhibit 2 tonight as well.
Yeah, and we'll make a condition, and I didn't indicate this earlier, satisfaction of all the elements that are set forth on exhibit A2, which is just what Ryan was referring to. Then I've added a water quality element to the stormwater management system, which is pretty vague. Do we want to pursue that at all, Jim?
Yes, yes, I certainly do. So
Okay,
I'll work with the engineer to do that.
Okay. Large porch, but we already showed that on exhibit A2. Landscape plan subject to review, we already have that. Okay, what do we want to do about the suggestion made by Mr. Goodhart? Let me go find that.
I think the crux of Mr. Goodhart's recommendation was to make sure that Dan Dobromelski.
Yeah, I think he had something specific, but I think he's covered.
He was suggesting a vine on the fence instead of trying to squeeze arborvitae in there, but I don't think we need to be specific about that.
I agree with you completely. Okay, I'm just going over Michael's, but we pretty much covered most of everything. Let me see if there's anything on the site plan review advisory board report of February 24, 2020. Let me see. Additional drawings or exhibits. These are one of the recommendations. Are recommended. One is placement and details of the trash and enclosure areas. This will, they say this will presumably increase the impervious cover. Jim, do we want that placement, a plan showing placement and details of the trash and enclosure and recycling enclosure areas?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Location of all utility meters should be shown.
Yes.
Correct? And I would assume we want those. Well, hold on.
That's on a site plan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I've gotten, hold on, I just got out of something.
He lost
Okay,
his.
okay, I'm back. Okay, so those are all shown in the site plan. And I guess the
Yes.
landscaping plan could address whatever screening we want of those.
Yes.
Specific locations of the 3 stormwater dry wells should be shown in the parking area. Are they not shown?
They are shown.
Okay, so we don't have to do that. Site grading should be changed at the east property line to direct surface storm water to an inlet in the parking area.
I'll be reviewing that during
We believe
compliance review.
that's addressed, but if
I
you want to keep
believe
it
it
as a
was-
condition, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
we can
we'll
leave
make it a
it, yeah.
condition. Okay. All right, talking about relocating the structure. One light pole at a maximum of height of 10 feet is recommended. With a minimum wattage, it conforms with the ordinance. Building mounted lighting is also being proposed. All lighting details and distribution patterns must be presented to the planning board. So that the lighting subject to review and approval of the land use engineer, correct?
Yes.
Hold on just one second.
I believe it's compliant, but no
Okay,
reason not to leave it in.
sure. Okay, the applicant is proposing a single color white for exterior siding, but that's already been changed. The charging stations. The party walls between the units should have a high level of sound separation. I mean, that's really getting beyond the purview of the planning board. I don't know that we want to put anything about that in. Jim, what do you think? No. Section 1 on A4 shows, and these were earlier plans, 3 feet of headroom at the top of the stairs. A shed roof similar to what is proposed for the middle unit should be incorporated to allow usable headroom. Is this an issue?
It's not a site plan issue.
Yeah.
That's an
okay.
architectural issue.
Okay.
I don't know if it's still an issue. I'm not an architect.
Ryan, do you have anything on that?
I believe that may have been addressed. These were, we visited SPRAD quite a while ago and revised the plan several times since then. So I believe that was addressed, but I also agree with Jim that it's not quite a site plan issue.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I think it's clearly not a site plan issue.
Okay, I'm not going to put that in. Then the applicant confirmed they'll work with Princeton, PSE&G, and the owners of numbers 6, 8, and 10 Humbert Place to effect the relocation of the utility pole underground service from the street to all 6 residential units on Humbert Places. Strongly recommended. Land use engineer question who will pay.
I'm going to ask Mr. Kennedy. I believe that's already been done. Is that correct?
It's certainly well underway. That's correct.
Okay, so we don't have to put anything in?
No.
It needs to happen, but it's in process. So.
We met with PSE&G out in the field and identified where the pole should be.
And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. So with those conditions, would someone like to make a motion one way or another on this application?
I'd make a motion to accept the application with the conditions.
Right, and the variances.
Yeah, the variances.
Right.
Second.
I'll second. Julie Capsoli. Oh,
Thanks, Julie. Mr. Oakman seconded first. But I appreciate the thought because I love seconds. No, thank you for that. So moved by Mr. McGowan, seconded by Mr. Oakman. Carrie, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizoli,
yes.
Mr. McGowan,
Yes.
Mr. Oakman,
Yes.
Mr. Quinn,
Yes.
Ms. Sachs,
Yes.
Mr. Texarney,
Yes.
Mr. O'Donnell,
Yes.
Mr. Chow,
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson.
Reluctantly, yes.
Motion carried.
Sorry, I don't mean to be dramatic. I just wish it were somewhat different. But thank you. And I am glad to see 3 dwellings coming in here. And thank you to the applicant and all of your professionals. I know you've put a ton of time into this and to our staff as well.
Thank you very
Anything
much.
else before we take a quick break and then move on to Lanwin?
I would just like to say thank you for the opportunity to be heard.
Mr. Pigeon, thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, did you want to take a 5-minute break?
I do, yes. It's 10:19, so let's return at 10:25 with the understanding that we will conclude at 11. See you soon.
So Carrie, I'm off now. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Councilman Cohen,
Okay,
welcome
thanks.
back.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Carrie. So next up on the agenda is the Landwind Development Corporation. This is continued from May 20th, which I think even at that point was a quick continuance. This is 725 and 823 Herringtown Road and 915 Mount Lucas Road, block 1001, lots 1, 2, and 14. This is file number P1818-648-PF/P.
Madam Chair, Mia has a statement she wishes to make.
Ms. Sachs?
Just that I'm going to be recusing from this application based on some activities related to the site that I'm involved with in the municipality, which on the advice of council, I will not go into further detail. But I did want to add that I had hoped by recusing that I would have the night off, and in fact, I have half an hour off. So have fun, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Let's see, do we have any other recusals?
Ms.
Okay.
Ruskin, were you able to listen to the recordings as I asked?
That question was for you, Jeffrey.
Oh, sorry. No, I know the last one I have not listened to yet.
Jeffrey could continue to participate because I'm sure we will not come to a point where we have to vote tonight. And as long as he's reviewed the transcripts or listened to the tapes before that vote, he can continue to participate and does not have to recuse himself.
Very good.
Thanks.
Okay. Memory serves, let's see, there you are, Mr. Laplace. People are all in different places on my screen now. I think that, well, I said your name, Michael, but I think that Mr. Dobromilski, Dan Dobromilski, was going to sort of set the table for us and provide some context because he was the consulting planner at the beginning. Is that correct, Mr. Laplace?
That is absolutely correct. It will probably come as no surprise to the board that this application started before I even returned to Princeton. So Dan will take it up where he started.
Okay, and Mr. Mueller, do you need to swear in Mr. Dobromilski, or is everyone who's been sworn in, months or years ago still?
They're still sworn in, and yeah. And Dan, have you been sworn in on this? I think you were, right?
Yes, I believe I gave a summary for this way back at the first hearing.
Right,
for this application. So
exactly.
So I'm not sure if you're looking for me to repeat that or.
No, I guess, and I think I communicated with the attorneys on this, but the thought was just to give a brief presentation, kind of setting the context of what is this all about? No evaluations, no adequacy, no conclusions, but particularly because it started so long ago and it kind of ended quite a while ago, also well over a year. Just so that it's not, the board doesn't come into this cold and they at least understand what this is about. So that's what we're talking about.
So a real quick summary.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want me to do that now, I assume?
Yes.
So this the Landwind development application that's before you right now on Herringtown Road is a 90-acre parcel bounded by Herringtown Road to the south, Montgomery Township to the north, Mount Lucas Road and Herringtown Road east and west. The property is slopes from the southeast to the northwest. There's some areas of steep slope, but not a large percentage. There are also considerable areas of environmental constraints, mostly associated with the water bodies or the brooks that traverse the property. The property is heavily wooded, but there is approximately a 15-acre area that is flatter and open and vegetated by lesser vegetation. The applicant is, this is located in the RA zone. A small eastern portion of the property is in the RB zone. About 1 acre of the tract fronts on Mount Locust Road and is zoned OR1. The applicant has demonstrated that 20 single-family residential lots with a minimum size of 4 acres could be established by conventional subdivision and road layout, including an extension of Herntown Road. However, they are proposing a cluster subdivision, which is intended to avoid disturbance of major portions of environmentally constrained and sensitive areas, preserve open space, and to develop on the flatter portion of the property with 30 residential lots.
And I think with respect to the as of right 20, I think the objectors are maybe raising issues about that and already have, but we'll get back to that. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. Yep. But they did submit a plan that shows that they felt that they could have 20 lots.
Yeah, right.
So under the residential cluster, there are 6 findings that must be made. They're in my report. And I think they have provided testimony already regarding those findings for the board. The way they're going about the 10-lot bonus, if you would, is they have 70% set aside of common open space, more than 1,000 linear feet of walking path, and a dedication of a municipal affordable housing property. So by doing that, they get a bonus of 2 for the open space, 2 lots for the walking paths, and 6 lots for the open space, which is how they go from 20 lots to 30 lots. The lots that are being proposed will be smaller.
Mr. Dobromilsky, I'm sorry to mess with your rhythm, but I might have misheard you, but I think you just said 2 lots for open space, 2 lots for linear pathways, and the remaining 6, I think you said for open space. Which one of those is for the affordable housing?
That was a mistake. So the 6 were for the affordable housing. I apologize. Thank you for picking that up. That was an error. So it's 2 for open space, 2 for walking path, and 6 for affordable housing. The proposed clustered lots will be approximately a half-acre size on average, ranging from 21,000 square feet to 33,000 square feet. The master plan does indicate that the entire development is designated as proposed open space. And there is a proposed Bund Drive extension through the parcel to Montgomery Township border on the master plan. The applicant is dedicating some property for road widening of Herntown Road. The subdivision itself will be served by a roadway of, I think it's 28-foot width with a boulevard or landscape median at the entrance. The entrance drive does cross through an area with some environmental sensitivity, which I think we've had some testimony about and cross-examination about. There were some concessions that the applicant has made along the way, or agreements. Some of them were to modify the grading to try and preserve more trees, to provide some buffer planting along the property line common with adjacent residential properties, and other things related to landscape that I have notes on. I think that basically summarizes where we're at. We've had some extensive testimony, and I think we're into some cross-examination of those testimony.
Well, I think at this point, and Bruce, you could jump in and correct this. This started a long time ago, back in February of 2019. The first substantive hearing was in April of 2019. The last one was in March of 2020. The applicant has put on its case in chief. It's had several experts. Tom Letizia could at least identify who they are, if you would like to do that, Tom, at this point, just so the board knows, what has preceded this. And Bruce has started to put on his case in chief, representing two objectors. And Bruce, when you speak, if you could identify who they are again for the board. And he's in the middle of making that presentation, and he's examining. Is it your forester you're examining now, or?
We were, Jerry, thank you. We were in the middle of examining our environmental scientist, Blaine Rothhauser.
Okay, good. Okay. And just tell the board who the prior witnesses that you've already put on, what their areas of expertise were.
Are you asking Tom or me, Jerry?
I'm asking you, and then I'm going to also ask Tom, just so the board knows where we are.
So my recollection, since we now go back 2 years, we called Ron Farr, who was a forester, and we called Lincoln Hollister, who was a professor of geology at Princeton University.
Right.
We were in the middle of Blaine Rothhauser, and I don't believe we called any other experts. We still have, to finish Blaine, we have an additional expert who may appear. Frankly, she was waiting, and I didn't realize how late the other application will go. So she's not here now.
No one realized how late it would go.
It's the way it is. And we also have Russ Smith and Carlos Rodriguez.
Okay,
So,
great.
and just, Jerry, since we're on the subject, it's not going to happen tonight anyway, but Russ has several areas to go into, one of which was addressing the as-of-right plan. But the applicant now has another as-of-right plan with some slight modifications. So we had a discussion between the three of us, Tom, myself, and you today about how to handle that. We were going to suggest leaving off his testimony tonight on the as-of-right plan, so we don't have to have him testify as to two distinct as-of-right plans. He could do that after Tom puts on the new plan as his rebuttal, in his rebuttal case. We might be able to go with Russ, though, and have him speak to his original presentation on the first as-of-right plan. Do that, and then when Tom comes in with rebuttal, Russ can address that new or changed plan to the extent he needs to. But obviously, we're not going to get to Russ tonight anyway.
Right. Tom, do you want to just briefly for the board tell them who you've put on, what their areas of expertise were?
Be happy to. Good evening, everyone. Tom Letizia, attorney representing Landwind Development Corp., the applicant. And for those who are keeping count, this is hearing number 9
right.
of the application, which, as you know, as Mr. Mueller noted, began in 2019. In terms of our case in chief, we put on 5 witnesses. We started with Jeffrey Brown, civil engineer, Princeton Junction Engineering. He was followed by Randy Curtis, environmentalist from Nautilus Environmental. And then we had Nicholas Bertorisi, traffic engineer from Dynamic Engineering. He was followed by William Barish, forestry management expert. And then our final witness was Keenan Hughes, professional planner. And they've all been cross-examined by Mr. Affron, and now we're at a point where Mr. Affron's in the middle of his case.
Okay, good. Thanks, Tom. And Bruce, you want to put on your witness? Oh, you're on mute. Bruce, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mean, it's putting us in a bit of a rough position because Blaine did give part of his testimony. He's obviously not going to finish before 11 today, so we have to break it into a third portion.
Yeah.
And I think it's becoming so disjointed through no one's fault, it's the virus's fault in part, that it would be a little unfair to everyone, really, for us to put Blaine on now, and then whenever we resume again, he continues. Also, he's been up since 6 a.m. in the field. He's out doing inspections for L'Oreal. And although he's not traveling today, and that's why we could get him back on, you know, it's a little hard on him to first start now. So
Yeah.
I'd rather we just do it on whatever day we next can go to.
Bruce.
So are you suggesting, Mr. Efron, that, well, is there someone else that you would have testify in the 20 minutes that we have? Or are you suggesting that we adjourn and start fresh?
I think
I
that's
use the word loosely at a different meeting.
right. I think that's the best way because honestly, we've had almost 1.5 year gap in the case. I'd hate to put, I'm not going to finish anyone tonight, frankly. If I put someone else on, they're still not going to finish. So I think it just lends to a lot of disjointed testimony. We would finish, I think, all of that within 2 hours, but you know, now it's going to be really broken up again. So
Yeah.
my preference would be that we just go back to another night when we start. Then at some point, Tom's going to do cross, then he has his rebuttal case, and then we discuss some other aspects of it between counsel. But I don't think it's really fair to anyone to go on with new material now.
Bruce, you mentioned you had one witness that was going to be short. Did you say she left?
She kind of left because she was exhausted. And so she would have been 10 minutes or so, but she couldn't do it. She was going to go on. I was going to put her on first ahead of Blaine, actually, but she had to beg off. I mean, I spoke to her a half hour ago.
Well, even if she hadn't left, I have to admit, you know, we now have 18 minutes, and the idea that it's going to be 10 minutes and we're going to finish in 18 minutes of this one witness, I think we'll wind up with the same problem we have with your present witness, where she won't finish. We'll be at 11 o'clock. I mean, my recommendation, Madam Chair, is to adjourn at this point. I think Bruce makes a very legitimate point that it's choppy enough. It's just going to make it a little more choppy, and we'll get very little in.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jerry. Thank you.
That's fine, except I'm hoping we can carry it to a date where we have a sufficient amount of time so that we can make some progress. Again, I'm not criticizing anyone. You know, it's just, I guess, the nature of what's been going on the last few months, you know, in terms of, you know, you have a very busy few months now with lots of applications.
We do.
You know, putting us on at 10 o'clock at night, you know, such a large application. It's not a very efficient use of time. That's all.
No, we certainly hope that the application before this would take less time.
Yeah. And Counselor, you'll be happy to hear that the board is discussing an earlier start time. So
oh, great. Well, that's
okay.
helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know whether when we'll be able to roll that out, but it is being discussed, I think.
Yes. Stay tuned.
And on the topic of, you know, virtual versus in person, has there been any decisions in that regard for the fall? No.
I'm sorry, what was your question?
Are you going to continue with virtual meetings
Oh,
in the near term, or are you going to go to in-person soon?
well, I have not heard. I guess we'll probably take our cue from council. And I think it's sort of a more complicated question than it may even seem, because the additional access that these virtual meetings provide is really, really important to a lot of people who remain at high risk. And so anyway, I don't want to be overly long-winded about it, but
yeah, I can also add to that from the staff side. Sort of a physical consideration is that the main meeting room, the council meeting room, is undergoing some renovations. So we're not sure when it'll even be available, but we are pretty much watching what the council, we're taking our lead from the council in terms of other boards and commissions.
Just as an advocate's position, I can do it either way, and I've been impressed with how this does work well. So I feel it has gone well. And when I'm examining a witness, I honestly don't feel there's any difference than being in person. So
yeah, that's fine.
And one advantage I found, ironically, is that when it's in person and you put up the the exhibits, the only people who can really see them are some of the members of the board. Nobody in the
Yes.
public can see them because of the way they're oriented. So this has.
Nobody in the public and nobody on the right side of the dais.
Exactly.
Unless
All
they
right, so
fix
let's
that.
talk dates. When can you carry us to?
Well, I'm looking at the
Go ahead, Carrie.
I'm looking at the calendar and we already have several applications for September. We don't have any meetings in August. We have 2 meetings in October, and one of which is going to be pretty large. So it would have to be October. October 7th would be the very soonest I could put you on.
Okay.
You said October 7?
Yeah.
And is there anything else that's
We have Witherspoon
that's-
LLC, which is a minor site plan. Major, Michael, is that a major or minor? Witherspoon LLC, 23A Witherspoon.
Off the top of my head, I think it's a major.
No, that's a minor.
Which one is that, Jim?
23A is the small building behind Mezzaluna.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
That shouldn't even be in front of the planning board.
That's even a
No,
better
well,
answer.
I mean, it's a minor subdivision. It
Site
should
plan.
just go to SPRAB. Or it's going to HPC, actually.
There's no variances?
No.
oh, so it won't actually, not just shouldn't, but
I
actually
meant it won't be, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, October 7 will be the very first opportunity.
Okay.
And again, we'll have most of the evening. So we think we can make,
Hope so.
Yes, that's why I was asking
All
about
right.
other applications. Yes.
okay. So if you make that announcement, I don't think we need to do any notice.
No further notice necessary, and just for the members of the public, you will not be receiving any further notice, and this is being carried to October 7th at what time, Louise?
Well, we really don't know. The executive committee needs to discuss an earlier start time, whether that's 6:30 or 7. I know 7 doesn't seem like a big difference, but most of the other committees and boards and I guess council too start at 7. So it would be 6:30 or 7. 6:30 might be a little early. Anyway, the board members are going to be polled about this soon, as well as staff. So we're going to figure it out and then, let all of our applicants and other interested parties know about the across the board change in meeting time to an earlier meeting time as soon as possible.
So
for
I
purposes,
suggest maybe, so we don't avoid renoticing, why don't you say 6:30? That would be the purpose, right?
I think my guess is likely not going to be
Maybe
6:30.
Okay.
I would recommend that for purposes of this, we say 7.
Okay, that's
What
fine.
do you think? What do you think, Louise?
7 is good. 7
All right.
sounds
Okay.
I just have a question about that. If we are changing the time, do we have to renotice anyway? Because of the
No, because
notice? No. Okay.
well, certainly not for this application. Any application for which we already took jurisdiction, we don't have to renotice. The only problem would be if there's some application out there that's given notice for a 7:30 start time, and now we change it to 7. But we could even deal with that by having administrative stuff from 7 to 7:30 or so.
I will do a sunshine notice once we make a determination on the time,
Good.
and that will cover us until the end of the year.
Good, great.
So October 7th, 7 PM.
Correct.
Yes.
We appreciate your patience, Counselor. This is a new leadership team now on the board, so and it was just appointed tonight, so we're trying to get our ducks in a row, as it were.
Congratulations, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your efforts.
Yes.
It's not easy.
All right.
And I also want to thank folks who tuned in, expecting to begin to hear this hours ago. Thanks for your patience. I hope the other application was moderately interesting, even if it's not what you wanted to see or hear.
Right.
Anything else?
I think this is the longest land use application in the history of the state of New Jersey.
Oh my.
I think we're going for a record here.
Tim,
Yeah.
you would be surprised.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You
Oh.
really would.
Hey, Tim,
I'm
you're
not advocating that if there's a longer one that we make it longer.
You don't want to break the record.
Tim,
I
Tim,
don't.
you're not counting next week's. Landmark was approved in 2005 and is back again.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
We did have,
Okay.
That's a
Oh, I had a quick question about the master plan RFP. Any
Yes.
updates on that?
okay, so
Oh.
we are now officially finished with the Landman application, just so.
Yes, it was issued, and I thought that Justin had distributed it to the entire board. I'm pretty
Louise,
sure
just,
that-
I mean, we could tell Tom and Bruce and any of the people they have that the application's now over.
Okay.
Oh,
them.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks a bunch. Good night.
Take care.
Yes, it was formally issued on the 29th of June
Okay,
with the
great.
response date of July 20th.
Yeah, and I can tell you that we're already getting responses from planning firms throughout New Jersey. So there seems to be a lot of interest.
Good. Excellent. I know Justin is, making sure it gets out through a lot of different, organizations and
We're doing a lot of social media too, which seems
Yeah.
to really be paying off.
great.
Oh, great.
It's on the website.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes, it is.
This one.
awesome.
Yeah.
Super. Great.
Mr. Cohen,
Cohen?
do your duty.
I was waiting for you to be ready for me.
I thought this was part of the new, the transition, that somebody else got to do it.
No.
Well,
You don't
I
replace
don't
a
want to hog
legend.
all the fun. Move to adjourn.
I will second that motion.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Hey, we
Aye.
finished before 11.
Happy
Madam
4th of
Chair.
July, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See some of you tomorrow morning. Stormwater meeting.